Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me last summer. I'm a vet who's seen combat, did 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. After getting out, I found work in construction in San Francisco. Good pay, decent hours, but city life was wearing me down after a while. My buddy Mike, who I served with, had bought this cabin up near Bluff Creek in Northern California, real remote place, surrounded by dense forest. When he invited me up for a week of fishing and just disconnecting from the world, I jumped at the chance. I needed the break from the constant noise and pressure of the city. The first couple days were amazing. We caught some decent trout, drank beer around a campfire, and just shot the shit like old times. Mike's property is pretty large, about 15 acres, and backs right up to national forest land. You could walk for days and not see another soul. On the 3rd night, we were sitting outside when we heard it for the first time. Wood knocking, like someone taking a baseball bat and just whacking the hell out of a tree. Thock, thock, thock. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. "What the hell was that?" I asked Mike. He just shrugged. "Probably a woodpecker or something. But I've heard woodpeckers before. This was different, much louder, more deliberate. And it came from way deeper in the woods than any bird would typically go as the sun was setting." Later that night, around 11, we heard it again. This time it sounded closer. Thock, thock, thock. Same pattern. 3 knocks, then nothing. "That's no damn woodpecker," I said. Mike looked a little unsettled but tried to play it cool. "Hunters maybe? Though nobody should be hunting at night." We both knew it wasn't hunters. Who the hell goes around knocking on trees in the pitch-black forest? The next day went normal enough. We hiked some trails, did a little more fishing. But I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched the whole time. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, turn to look, and see nothing. Just trees swaying in the breeze. But the feeling persisted. That evening, I got a text from my boss saying he needed me back in the city for an emergency job. Some rich client was demanding we start work on their renovation immediately, or they'd pull the contract. Mike understood. He knows how construction gigs go, so I packed up my stuff and planned to head out. It was already past midnight when I finally got everything together. Mike offered to let me stay till morning, but I figured I could drive through the night and be back in San Francisco by sunrise. I've always been a night owl anyway, and the roads would be empty. The drive from Mike's cabin to the main highway is about 20 miles of old logging roads, narrow, winding, unpaved in spots. Not ideal for night driving, but my truck has good headlights, and I was confident I could handle it. I said goodbye to Mike around 2 in the morning and started down the mountain. The night was clear, with a half moon providing just enough ambient light to see the edges of the road. The forest around me was dense, tall pines and redwoods creating walls on either side of the road. About 5 miles from Mike's place, I felt my truck shudder and pull to the right. The steering wheel started vibrating in my hands. Flat tire. Just my fucking luck. I pulled over at a small turnout. The road at this point cut into the side of the mountain, with the steep ridge rising about 10 feet up on my right and a sharp drop-off to my left. Not the best place to change a tire, but I didn't have much choice. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out. The night was dead silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Just that eerie mountain silence that feels almost physical, like pressure against your eardrums. Growing up on a farm in Ohio, I was used to the countryside at night. But there's always some noise, insects, distant animals, something. This was different, this was wrong. I walked around to the passenger side, where the flat was, and crouched down to inspect it. Looked like I'd hit a rock or something sharp enough to tear a decent gash in the sidewall. As I was looking at it, I heard it. Breathing. Heavy, powerful breathing. coming from the ridge above me. At first, I thought maybe it was a bear. We have black bears in these mountains, and they're usually pretty skittish, but you never want to surprise one. I slowly stood up and pointed my flashlight toward the sound. The breathing continued. It made this weird whooshing sound, both on the inhale and exhale. Whoosh in, whoosh out, loud enough that I could hear it clearly from at least 20 feet away. Whatever was making that sound was big, really big. Here's the thing, I've been around livestock my whole life. Grew up with horses, cows, pigs. I've hunted deer, elk, even tracked a mountain lion once. I know what animals sound like when they breathe. This wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. The breaths were too controlled, too rhythmic, too human in their pattern, but way too powerful to be a person. Each breath sounded like it was moving enough air to fill a garbage bag. I swept my flashlight across the ridge, but couldn't see anything, just rocks and brush and trees. But I knew something was there, watching me. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded small and pathetic in that vast silence. The breathing stopped for a moment, then it got louder. Whatever it was had moved closer. My heart was hammering in my chest. Combat vets talk about that fight or flight response, how training takes over. But this was different. This triggered something deeper, more primal. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get the fuck out of there. I didn't even bother with the tire. I jumped back in my truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. I could drive on the rim if I had to, just to get away from that sound and whatever was making it. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a split second, I thought I saw something move at the top of the ridge, something large standing upright. But it was dark, and I was scared, and I told myself it was just shadows playing tricks. I drove another 3 or 4 miles down the mountain, the truck limping along on its flat tire, before I finally felt safe enough to stop again. This time, I was at a wider section of the road, with better visibility all around. No ridge, no drops, just flat ground and trees. I got out, still on high alert, and quickly changed the tire. The whole time I felt like I was being watched from the tree line. That silence was still there, that unnatural quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. Almost like a pressure, like the air before a thunderstorm, but worse. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen, expecting to hear that breathing again. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears and the occasional metallic clink as I worked on the tire. I finished changing it in record time and got back on the road. I didn't relax until I hit the main highway and saw other cars. Even then, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see something massive emerge from the trees behind me. I told myself it was just an animal, a bear maybe, or an elk, something normal. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever was on that ridge wasn't normal wildlife. The weird thing is, that wasn't the end of it. Fast forward to last month, I'd moved back to Ohio to help take care of my dad after he had a stroke. One weekend, I decided to do some fishing at Salt Fork State Park. It's a big place, lots of remote spots where you can find some peace and quiet. I hiked about 2 miles to this secluded cove I'd found on a previous trip. Great spot for base, and usually deserted. I was having a good day, caught a few nice ones, just enjoying the solitude. Around mid-afternoon, I started hearing these weird noises from the woods behind me. At first, I thought it was hikers, maybe kids playing, but the sounds were odd. Small rocks landing in the water near me, twigs snapping in patterns that seemed deliberate. I turned around and scanned the tree line, but didn't see anyone. Then a rock about the size of a golf ball splashed down about 10 feet from where I was standing. "Hello?" I called out. "Someone there?" No answer. Just more silence, like at Bluff Creek. That same unnatural quiet. I packed up my gear, thinking maybe some local kids were messing with me. As I was getting ready to leave on some weird impulse, I decided to try something. When I was deployed, we had this Mongolian interpreter who would do throat singing sometimes. He taught me the basics, and I'd gotten pretty decent at it. It's this weird, resonant sound that carries for a long distance. So I did it there by the lake, just a simple, low drone that gradually shifted pitch. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to see if whoever was throwing rocks would reveal themselves. What happened next still gives me goosebumps. From deep in the forest, maybe 100 yards in, I heard what sounded like children. Laughing, chattering, making these high-pitched sounds that weren't quite words, but definitely weren't animal noises either. But here's the thing, there were no hiking trails in that direction, just dense forest and rough terrain. No place kids would be playing. And these sounds, they didn't move like people would. They seemed to come from different heights, some near the ground, some from much higher up, as if whatever was making them was climbing through the trees. I got the hell out of there, hiked back to my car faster than I'd ever moved before. The whole time I felt like I was being followed, but every time I looked back, there was nothing. I haven't been back to Salt Fork since then. I haven't told anyone about this either. Who would believe me? A grown man, a combat veteran, spooked by weird breathing and rocks being thrown. I'd sound crazy. But I know what I heard both in California and in Ohio. Whatever was watching me on that logging road, whatever was throwing rocks at Salt Fork, they're the same thing, and they're not any animal I've ever encountered before. I still have nightmares about that breathing sound, that powerful, deliberate whoosh in, whoosh out. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear it outside my window, and sometimes when I'm alone in the woods I catch myself listening for those wood knocks. Thock, 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 3 times, always 3. Story 2. Ivy spent 5 years working trap lines in the Kettle River Range, just north of Republic in Washington. My buddy Mark and I had been running the same line every winter since 1997. We weren't amateurs. We knew the terrain, understood animal behavior, and always came prepared. We'd set up our usual canvas wall tent about 12 miles from any road access, near a little creek that runs off a game trail. Good spot, secluded, plenty of wildlife activity. December 16th, 2002. I'll never forget that date. The day started normal enough. Temperatures were hovering around 20 degrees, maybe 6 inches of snow on the ground. Mark and I had spent the morning checking our traps along the ridge about 3 miles from our base camp. We'd been out since sunrise, standard procedure, check the line, reset traps, collect anything we caught. We were heading back around 4 in the afternoon, sun already dropping behind the mountains. I remember feeling tired, but satisfied. We'd had a decent day, 2 martens and a beaver. Not our best haul, but respectable. The light was fading fast, that weird blue-gray winter dusk settling over everything. We were maybe a quarter mile from camp when Mark stopped dead in his tracks. "You smell that?" he asked. I took a deep breath. There was something in the air, musky, almost like wet dog, but stronger, more pungent. Not an animal smell I recognized, and I've been in these woods all my life. Probably just a bear that passed through, I said, though deep down I knew better. Bears would be denned up by mid-December. We pressed on, moving a bit faster now. When we crested the small rise overlooking our camp, I felt my stomach drop. Even in the dimming light, I could tell something was very wrong. "What the hell?" Mark whispered. Our camp was destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. The canvas tent was torn to shreds, pieces of it hanging from nearby branches. The metal poles were snapped like twigs. One was actually embedded in a tree about 15 feet up, like it had been thrown with incredible force. Our gear was scattered across 30 yards of snow in every direction. We approached cautiously, rifles ready. I'm not ashamed to admit my hands were shaking. This wasn't normal animal behavior. Bears will mess up a camp looking for food. But this was different. This was methodical destruction. My pack was floating in the creek, partially frozen in the ice. Mark's sleeping bag had been shredded, not just torn, but actually pulled apart fiber by fiber and stuffed into a hole beside a fallen log. Our small camp axe was completely missing. So was our cooking pot and Mark's extra boots. The folding camp chair was crushed flat, bent in a way that would have taken serious strength. The firewood we'd collected was scattered. Some pieces had been thrown 20 feet away from the fire pit. Our food bag, which we'd properly hung in a tree away from camp, was gone. Rope snapped clean through. But what really got me were the tracks. They were everywhere around the destroyed camp. Massive human-shaped footprints, over 16 inches long and at least 8 inches wide. You could clearly see 5 toes. The stride between prints measured over 4 feet. I know because I used my own height to measure. I'm 6'2", and when I laid down between 2 prints, they extended past my head and feet. "This isn't a bear," Mark said quietly. "No, it definitely wasn't a bear. The sun was nearly gone now, and temperatures were dropping fast. We had no shelter. Half our gear was destroyed or missing, and something very large and very angry had clearly targeted our camp specifically. We need to get out of here," I said. Mark nodded, but we both knew hiking out in the dark through 12 miles of wilderness in sub-freezing temperatures wasn't a smart option either. We were stuck. We gathered what we could salvage and built a small fire using the scattered firewood. We positioned ourselves with our backs against a large pine tree, giving us some protection and a clear view of the surrounding area. We kept our rifles across our laps. Neither of us said much. The night got cold fast, probably dropped to around 10 degrees. We took turns staying awake, though honestly, I don't think either of us actually slept. Every crack of a branch or whisper of wind had us on high alert. Around midnight, I was staring into the fire when I heard it. Something moving uphill from our position. Not trying to be quiet either. Heavy footsteps crunching in the snow. Mark heard it too and raised his rifle slightly. Whatever it was, it circled around us, staying just beyond the ring of firelight. I could hear it moving, stopping, then moving again. It was pacing around us, like it was studying our position. This went on for maybe 20 minutes, then everything went completely silent. That unnatural silence that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. A low, deep growl carried through the cold air. Not like a bear or a cougar. Deeper, more resonant, more human but not quite. It's hard to describe. It was a sound that didn't belong in those woods, a sound that triggered something primal in my brain. Then came the sharp crack of a tree branch snapping. Not a small twig, a sound like a baseball bat breaking in half. It was a warning. I'm convinced of that. It was letting us know it could break us just as easily. We didn't see anything that night, but we felt its presence until dawn. Neither of us moved from that spot. When the first gray light of morning finally came, we packed what little remained of our gear and hiked out. Didn't talk much on the way. What was there to say? We'd both experienced the same thing. It took us about 5 hours to reach the truck. Every step of the way, I felt like we were being watched. Several times I caught that same musky odor on the wind. A week later, after we'd had some time to process, we went into Republic for supplies, ended up at the small diner in town, where a couple of old-timers gather every morning. We didn't plan to talk about what happened, but somehow the conversation turned to strange experiences in the woods. That's when we met Jim, a retired Forest Service worker in his 70s. When we hesitantly mentioned the tracks we'd found, he got real quiet and studied us carefully. "How big were they?" he asked. When I told him, he nodded knowingly. "I seen him myself," he said quietly. "Back in '82, north of Deadman Creek, working a fire survey. Watched him move through a clearing about 100 yards away. 8, maybe 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair, moved like nothing I've ever seen. Smooth, quick, purposeful." "What did you do?" Mark asked. "Nothing," Jim replied. "He knew I was there, made eye contact with me, then just moved on. I never went back to that drainage again. That's his territory, not ours. We never returned to that trap line. Actually, we gave up winter trapping altogether after that season. Some people don't believe me when I tell this story. That's fine. I don't need them to believe. I know what happened. I've spent my life in these mountains. I know every animal track, every natural sound, every normal woodland smell. What destroyed our camp wasn't anything recognized by science. I believe we had inadvertently set up our camp in territory that belonged to something else, something that's managed to stay hidden from most people. And it gave us a very clear warning. The most unsettling part, when we finally got back to civilization and checked our trail cameras, which we'd set up along the trapline. 2 of them were missing entirely. The third one was still there, but when we checked the memory card, the last 3 images were completely black, like something had covered the lens deliberately before removing the batteries, which we found neatly placed on top of the camera. Whatever it was, it understood what our cameras were. It understood that our tent was our shelter. It understood exactly how to send a message that we couldn't ignore. I still hunt and fish in the Kettle Range, but never in that area and never overnight in winter. Some places in this world don't belong to us, and I think it's wiser to respect those boundaries than to push our luck. I've never told this story publicly before now, but I feel like people should know. There are things in the wilderness that defy explanation, and sometimes the safest thing you can do is simply acknowledge that and keep your distance. Story 3. I'm still shaking as I write this. I've been debating whether to post this for days, but I need to tell someone who won't immediately think I'm crazy. This happened just a week ago, and I haven't slept properly since. I live in a pretty isolated spot near West Milford, New Jersey, right on the edge of Way Yonder State Park. My house backs up to dense forest that stretches for miles. I've always loved the privacy, the quiet, the way you can actually see stars at night. But now I'm not so sure anymore. It was October 1st, around 1 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. Work stress had my mind racing. So I went to the kitchen for some water. I wasn't even fully awake, just shuffling around in the dark with only the dim light above the stove on. I filled my glass from the tap and was about to head back to bed when something caught my eye through the window. My kitchen window faces the backyard and the tree line beyond. There's maybe 20 yards of cleared land before the forest starts. I've always kept motion sensor lights out there because, well, we get deer, coyotes, and the occasional bear. But here's the thing. The sensors hadn't triggered. The yard was completely dark. What caught my attention were 3 pairs of eyes, deep red eyes, moving in a perfect line along the ridge where the property meets the forest. And when I say red, I don't mean the yellowish or greenish reflection you get from deer or raccoons. These were a deep blood red, and they seemed to glow on their own, not reflecting any light source. I froze with the glass halfway to my mouth. The eyes were at least 7 feet off the ground, maybe higher. They moved in single file, perfectly spaced, following what looked like some kind of established path. The way they moved was wrong. Completely silent, smooth, deliberate. No bouncing like you'd see with a deer or other 4-legged animal. These moved like they were gliding. I couldn't make out bodies. It was too dark. Just those eyes moving steadily through the night. They followed the tree line for about 30 seconds before disappearing into the deeper woods behind my garage. The whole time, I couldn't move. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I just stood there, water dripping down my hand because I was gripping the glass so tight. When they finally disappeared, I practically ran back to my bedroom and locked the door. I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm a grown man locking myself in my bedroom, but something about those eyes triggered a primal fear in me. The thing is, this wasn't even the first weird thing to happen that week. The previous Thursday, I'd been jolted awake around 3 in the morning by what sounded like someone smacking trees with a baseball bat. Just these heavy, wooden thwack sounds coming from the woods. 3 distinct hits, then silence for maybe 2 minutes, then 3 more, After the second set, there was this bizarre sound like someone crushing metal, like when you step on an aluminum can, but much louder. At the time, I figured it was maybe some kids messing around in the woods, though that didn't make much sense given how far my property is from the nearest road. Or maybe it was some kind of forestry work, though that didn't make sense at 3 in the morning either. But here's what's got me really freaked out. Both incidents happened in exactly the same direction, behind my garage, heading into the deeper part of the forest. I've lived here for 6 years. I know what bears sound like. I know what deer and coyotes look like when their eyes reflect light. This was something else entirely. The next morning, after seeing those eyes, I went outside to check for tracks. The ground was slightly damp from rain the previous day, but I couldn't find anything definitive, just some areas where the grass seemed pressed down in a line that matched the path those eyes had taken. No distinct footprints, just disturbances. I've spent hours researching since then. At first, I thought maybe it was some weird optical illusion, or that I was half asleep and imagining things. But the more I've looked into it, the more I keep coming back to one explanation that I never would have considered before. Sasquatch. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. I've never been the type to buy into cryptid stories or conspiracy theories. I'm an accountant, for God's sake. I deal in concrete numbers and verifiable facts. But when I started reading about Bigfoot encounters, so many details lined up with what I saw. The height of the eyes, consistent with an 8 to 9 foot tall bipedal creature. The wood-knocking sounds, apparently a common form of communication among them. The way they moved, in a single file line along established paths. Even the time. Most sightings happen between midnight and 4 in the morning. I called my buddy Mike the next day, trying to sound casual, when I asked if he'd ever heard stories about weird creatures in way yonder. He laughed and told me that his grandfather used to talk about forest people in those woods back in the 50s. I didn't tell Mike what I saw. I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud yet. The forests around here are extensive, tens of thousands of acres of dense woodland that connect to even larger wilderness areas. A family of these creatures could easily remain hidden, just occasionally crossing through properties like mine as they move between areas. I've barely slept since it happened. I keep replaying it in my mind. Those eyes, the perfect spacing between them, the deliberate way they moved, the absolute silence, no breaking branches, no footfalls, nothing, just those glowing red eyes passing through my property like they'd done it 100 times before. I've started keeping a baseball bat by my bed, installed more security lights. I even set up a trail camera facing that same stretch of woods, though I'm not sure I actually want to capture anything on it. Last night, I was sitting in my living room around midnight when all the hair on my arms stood up. I can't explain it, but I felt like I was being watched. I went to the window and stared out into the darkness for almost 20 minutes. I didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there was looking back at me. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to come up with explanations. Maybe it was hunters with some kind of specialized gear. But who hunts in perfect formation, in the middle of the night, making no sound? Maybe some kind of elaborate prank, but who would go to such lengths out here, miles from anywhere, with no audience? I've always been comfortable with the wilderness. I hike regularly. I know the local wildlife. But now I find myself staring into the trees, wondering what else might be out there. What might be watching me right now as I sit in my house typing this. I haven't told anyone else. How do you even bring that up in conversation? Hey, by the way, I think I saw a family of Bigfoot crossing my backyard the other night. I'd sound insane. Hell, sometimes I think I am insane. But then I remember those eyes, the height, the movement, the silence. It was real. I've started researching other sightings in the area. Turns out there have been reports of strange creatures in these woods going back decades. Native American legends talk about forest guardians that protected certain areas from human intrusion. Early settlers recorded encounters with wild men in these same forests. The worst part is the waiting. I don't know if they'll come back. I don't know if they're watching my house. I don't know if next time they'll come closer. I've taken to closing all the blinds at night, something I never used to do when I enjoyed looking out at the stars. Yesterday, I walked to the edge of my property and just stood there staring into the woods. It was broad daylight, but I still couldn't shake this feeling of being observed. The forest suddenly seemed so much darker, so much more alien than it ever had before. I used to find comfort in those trees. Now they feel like they're hiding something. I've started hearing things too. Probably just my imagination working overtime. But twice now, I've woken up to what sounded like something heavy walking around outside my house. By the time I work up the courage to look, whatever it is has gone. The logical part of my brain says I should move, sell the house, get away from here. But another part of me is curious, terrified, but curious. What if I really did see what I think I saw? What if there really are these creatures living in the woods, occasionally passing through human areas at night? Wouldn't that be an incredible discovery? I'm torn between fear and fascination, between wanting to pack up everything and run, and wanting to set up more cameras, maybe even try to make contact somehow. For now, I'm just watching and waiting. I keep the blinds closed at night. I don't go outside after dark anymore. I listen for those wood-knocking sounds and wonder what they mean. Are they warnings, communications, some kind of territorial display? It's been a week since I saw those eyes, and I haven't seen them again. But I feel different about my home now, about the woods that surround it. I used to feel like this was my space, my little corner of the wilderness. Now I realize I might just be an intruder in someone else's territory, someone or something that was here long before me and will probably be here long after I'm gone. I don't know what I'll do if I see those eyes again. Part of me hopes I never do. Part of me can't stop looking for them every time I glance out the window at night. All I know is that something passed through my property that night, something that moved like nothing I've ever seen before, something with eyes that glowed red in the darkness, and ever since then, the woods don't feel empty anymore. Story 4. I still can't explain what happened to me last February at Moosehead Lake. I'm not the type who believes in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I mean, I wasn't. Now I don't know what to think anymore. I had been working non-stop for months. The pandemic had my company in chaos, and I was pulling 60-hour weeks just trying to keep things afloat. By February, I was completely burnt out. My girlfriend had just broken up with me, saying I was emotionally unavailable, fair, and I needed to get away. I found this little cabin rental online. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place nestled in the woods near Moosehead Lake in Maine. It seemed perfect. No neighbors, no cell reception, just me and nature for a weekend. The drive up was beautiful. Maine in winter has this pristine quality to it, everything covered in snow, those tall pines, that crisp air that hurts your lungs a little when you breathe it in deep. I arrived around 4 in the afternoon on Friday. The cabin was exactly what I expected, rustic but clean, with a wood stove, small kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, and a little living area with a couch facing big windows that looked out into the forest. The property manager had left the key under a flower pot, as promised. He'd also left a note warning me that the temperatures were supposed to drop below 0 that night and to keep the wood stove going. I unpacked my stuff, got a fire going, and just sat on the couch, watching the snow fall outside as the daylight faded. It felt so peaceful. I made myself a simple dinner, had a few beers, and started reading this thriller I'd brought along. I must have dozed off on the couch, because I woke up disoriented around 11 at night. The fire had died down to embers, and the cabin was getting cold. I added more wood to the stove, used the bathroom, and headed to bed. I fell asleep almost immediately. I was exhausted, and something about the absolute silence of those woods just pulled me under. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. My watch said it was just after midnight, but it felt like I'd been asleep for hours. What woke me was a sound. Not like an owl or coyotes or anything I'd expect to hear in the woods. This was a scream. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the most unsettling sound I've ever heard. It was somehow both animal and not. Like if a person was trying to imitate a wolf, but their vocal cords were all wrong. It was loud and it echoed through the trees. At first, I told myself it was just a fisher cat or maybe a mountain lion. I've heard they can sound eerily human-like. But then it happened again, and this time it was closer. Much closer. I got out of bed and went to the window. The moon was bright enough that I could see the clearing around the cabin and the edge of the forest about 50 yards away. Nothing moved. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, straining my eyes, thinking maybe I'd see a moose or something that could explain the noise. Then it screamed again, and this time it was at the edge of the trees. I could see where it was coming from, but I couldn't see what was making the sound. Just darkness between the trunks. I'm not proud of this, but my heart was racing so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack. I backed away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. I'm a 37-year-old man, for Christ's sake. I've been camping plenty of times. Wildlife doesn't scare me, but then the whole cabin shook. Something had hit the exterior wall with incredible force, like someone had taken a battering ram to it. The impact was so violent that a framed picture fell off the wall and the glass shattered on the floor. I froze. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Another impact hit the opposite wall hard enough that I heard the wood creak in protest. Whatever this was, it was circling the cabin, and it was big, really big. I scrambled for my phone even though I knew there was no reception. I needed a flashlight, a weapon, anything. The phone's light was pathetically dim, but it was all I had. I grabbed the fireplace poker from the living room and stood in the center of the cabin, trying to anticipate where the next blow would come from. Another impact, this time near the front door. Then another at the back of the cabin. It was testing the structure, looking for weaknesses. I could hear it moving around outside, heavy footsteps crunching in the snow, branches snapping. It wasn't trying to be stealthy anymore. I remembered the porch light. The switch was by the front door. I made my way there, trying not to make a sound, which was ridiculous because whatever was out there knew exactly where I was. I flipped the switch, and the small area in front of the cabin lit up with harsh yellow light. For a few moments, nothing happened. The woods were dead silent. Then I heard it moving again, circling just beyond the reach of the light. I went to the window next to the door and peered out, pressing my face close to the glass to see as much as I could. That's when I saw it, just for a second as it moved from one side of the cabin to the other, passing through the edge of the light. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, massive shoulders, long arms that hung too low, and dark, matted hair covering its entire body. It moved quickly for something so large, almost gracefully, but with undeniable power in every movement. I stumbled backward, knocking over a side table. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. This was upright, bipedal, but definitely not human. Another impact hit the wall so hard I thought it might break through. I heard wood splintering. Then another hit, and another. It was methodical now, striking the same spot repeatedly. I grabbed my phone and frantically tried to call 911, but there was still no signal. I was completely alone with this thing. For nearly an hour, it continued circling the cabin. Sometimes it would stop and go quiet for several minutes, and I'd think maybe it had left. Then suddenly there would be another deafening scream and another powerful blow against the walls. Each time it struck, I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. The whole structure trembled. I was shaking uncontrollably. I'd managed to drag the mattress off the bed and position it against the wall that seemed to be taking the most damage, as if that would do anything against whatever was out there. Around 1:30 in the morning, the attacks seemed to intensify. The creature was no longer just circling. It was focusing on the front door. I heard it breathing on the other side, deep, heavy breaths that sounded too deliberate, too controlled to be an animal. Then it let out the loudest scream yet, a sound so primal and aggressive that I covered my ears and curled into a ball on the floor. The blow that followed nearly took the door off its hinges. The wood cracked, and I could see the door frame splinter. One more hit like that and it would be inside with me. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just stared at the door, waiting for it to burst open, waiting to see that thing in full light, face to face. But the next blow never came. Instead, I heard it moving away from the door, its heavy footsteps receding. Another scream, but this one was further away, back at the edge of the forest. Then silence. I stayed exactly where I was, clutching the poker until the first light of dawn started to filter through the windows. I hadn't slept, hadn't moved. My body ached from being tensed for hours. When I finally found the courage to look outside, the morning was calm and quiet, as if nothing had happened. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, but not enough to cover the evidence. Huge footprints circled the cabin, and I mean huge. They had to be at least 17 inches long and incredibly wide. They were clearly feet with 5 toes, not bare paws. The stride between them was massive, easily 6 or 7 feet apart. The exterior walls of the cabin showed the damage, splintered wood where the creature had struck most severely by the front door. The door itself was cracked down the middle, the frame damaged to the point that I had trouble closing it properly. I packed my things in record time. There was no way I was staying another night. As I was loading my car, I noticed an older man watching me from the property next door, maybe a quarter mile away. He was standing on his porch with a cup of coffee, just observing. I waved, and to my surprise, he walked over. His name was Bill, and he lived there year-round. I hesitated, but then asked if he'd heard anything strange during the night. He looked at me for a long moment, then at the damaged door. "Awful cold last night," he said. "Wood contracts. Makes all sorts of noises." I pointed to the footprints. "And these?" He barely glanced at them. "Moose, probably. Big bulls come through here sometimes." I knew he was lying. Those weren't moose tracks, and he knew it. Before he walked away, he said something that still haunts me. "These woods are old. Some things been here longer than us. Best to respect their space." On my drive back, I stopped at a diner in the nearest town. The waitress asked how I'd enjoyed my stay at the lake. When I mentioned I'd rented the Morrison cabin, the name of the property, she exchanged glances with another server. I pushed a little, asking if there had been any strange reports from that area. "That's Blackwood territory," she said quietly. "Always has been." When I asked what Blackwood meant, she just shook her head and refilled my coffee. I've spent months researching since then. Blackwood isn't in any official records I could find, but I did discover forum posts from others who'd had similar experiences in that region. Most were dismissed as bear encounters or hoaxes, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I haven't been camping since that night. I used to love the wilderness, used to find peace in those quiet, remote places. Now I can't even walk in a city park after sunset without looking over my shoulder. I don't know what to call what I encountered. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Wendigo, the name doesn't matter. What matters is that it's real, and it's powerful, and it's out there. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night in my apartment, with all the sounds of the city around me, I swear I can hear that scream again, just at the edge of my hearing. And I wonder if it followed me home. Story 5. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but after what happened last August, I can't keep it to myself anymore. My cousin David and I have been doing our annual fishing trip on the Umpqua River in southwestern Oregon for years. It's always been peaceful, just 2 guys, some fishing gear, and a small gravel island that we'd camp on. Nothing eventful ever happened before until last year. August 2020. We'd been planning this trip for months, especially since COVID had everyone cooped up. We needed that escape. The weather was perfect when we set out. Not too hot, clear skies. We paddled our raft out to this little gravel island we'd camped on before. It's nothing special, just a patch of land in the middle of the river. But it's private, and the fishing's always been good there. We got to the island around 3 in the afternoon, set up our small tent, gathered some wood for the fire, and spent the day fishing. Caught a few nice steelhead too. Everything was normal, just a typical day on the river with my cousin. As the sun started to set, a fog began rolling in, not unusual for the area, but it came on pretty thick and fast. We built up our campfire, cooked our fish, and were just sitting there drinking a couple beers, talking about nothing important. The fog kept getting thicker until we could barely see the shorelines on either side of us. It must have been around 9:30 when we heard it. A deep, guttural growl coming from the north bank of the river. At first, I thought it was a bear. "There are black bears in the area," I whispered to David. "You hear that?" He nodded, eyes wide, and reached for his flashlight. Before we could even process what we'd heard, another growl came from the opposite bank. This one sounded identical. Deep, powerful, like nothing I've ever heard before. Not a bear, not a cougar, nothing I could identify. "What the hell is that?" David whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, and I remember how dry my mouth felt suddenly. "But there's 2 of them, one on each side." We sat absolutely still, listening. The fire crackled between us, and for a minute or two there was nothing. Then we heard branches snapping, loud, deliberate breaks, like something large was moving through the trees. And it wasn't just coming from one side, we could hear it from both banks. The sounds got closer, and then, God, I still get chills thinking about it. A full-throated roar echoed down the canyon from the north bank. It was so loud, so powerful, it seemed to vibrate through my chest. Before it even finished, another roar answered from the south bank, like they were calling to each other. David and I looked at each other, and I've never seen such pure fear on his face. I'm sure mine looked the same. We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them toward the banks, sweeping the beams across the fog. That's when I saw it, just for a second on the north bank. A large, upright shape moving behind some trees, taller than any man should be, way taller. David must have seen something on the south bank too, because he suddenly grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. "Mike," he hissed, "there's something over there, something big." I didn't have time to respond before the first rock hit the island, splashing into the water just feet from where we sat. Then another hit our campfire, sending sparks flying. A third rock struck our tent, denting one of the poles. "They're throwing rocks at us," David yelled, no longer concerned about being quiet. We scrambled to our feet, backing toward our raft, which was pulled up on the gravel. Another rock hit just beside it, almost pushing it back into the water. These weren't random throws. They were aiming at us, at our camp, at our only means of escape. For 15 hellish minutes, the creatures on both banks roared and threw rocks. The accuracy was terrifying. These weren't just random tosses. They were deliberately targeting specific objects in our camp. One rock whizzed right between David and me as we huddled together. Another smashed our cooking pot. I've been a pitcher in local baseball leagues for years, and I've never seen that kind of precision from that distance in the dark. Then, during a brief lull, I pointed my flashlight directly at the south bank, and that's when I saw it clearly. The creature stepped into view for just a moment, maybe 5 seconds at most, but it was enough. It was enormous, had to be over 8 feet tall, with a wide body covered in dark hair or fur. Its arms hung long at its sides, reaching almost to its knees. The head sat low on incredibly broad shoulders, almost like it didn't have a neck. I couldn't make out facial features from that distance, but the silhouette was unmistakably not human. It stepped back into the tree line after those few seconds, but that image is burned into my memory. I'll never forget it. The other creature on the north bank never showed itself as clearly, but we could hear it slamming something against the trees, maybe a branch or a log. The sound echoed across the river, punctuated by occasional roars. "Sasquatch," David whispered. "There's 2 of them, and they've got us trapped." I've never believed in Bigfoot. Always thought it was a myth, a story to sell t-shirts to tourists. But standing there on that island, hearing those sounds, seeing that figure, I knew we were dealing with something real, something that shouldn't exist, but did. We pulled our raft closer to us and crouched low beside it, keeping our flashlights pointed outward. Neither of us said much. What was there to say? We were surrounded by creatures we couldn't explain, with no way off the island until morning. Every time we'd move or talk, a rock would fly onto the island as if to say, "We know you're there, and we want you gone." But they never came into the water. They maintained their positions on both banks, watching us, intimidating us. I remember checking my watch at one point, 11:45. We'd been under siege for over 2 hours, and it felt like an eternity. My body ached from crouching, from the tension, from the pure adrenaline pumping through my system. Around midnight, the rocks stopped coming, but the creatures would still call to each other maybe once every half hour, deep, resonating sounds that carried easily across the water. Sometimes one would break branches or hit trees, like they were reminding us they were still there. I don't think either of us slept. We just sat there, backs against the raft, flashlights in hand, listening to every sound. I remember the fog had this eerie glow from our campfire, which had died down to embers by then. Around 3 in the morning, the sounds began to fade. The calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. We still didn't move much, afraid it might be some kind of trick. When the first light of dawn finally broke around 5:30, we waited another half hour before standing up. My legs were so stiff I could barely walk. We surveyed our campsite in the growing light, and it was a mess. Rocks of various sizes were scattered across the island. Our tent had a dented pole and a tear in the side. Our cooking gear was dented and scattered. David walked to the edge of the island facing the south bank and suddenly called out to me, his voice shaking. "Mike, you need to see this." I joined him at the water's edge and felt my blood run cold. There, in the wet gravel and mud at the edge of the island, were footprints. Massive footprints, easily 16 inches long and proportionally wide. They led from the water up onto the island, suggesting one of the creatures had actually waded into the river and approached within 10 feet of where we'd been huddled all night. "It came onto the island," David said, his voice barely audible, "while we were sitting right here." I don't remember much about packing up. We just threw everything into the raft as quickly as possible, not caring about organization or damage. We were on the water within 20 minutes, paddling downstream as fast as our exhausted bodies would allow. We didn't talk much on the way back. What was there to say? We'd experienced something impossible, something that shattered our understanding of the world. It's been a year now since that night. David and I have talked about it many times, trying to make sense of what happened. We've researched Sasquatch encounters, and many aspects match what others have reported. The rock throwing, the territorial behavior, the vocalizations. One thing we can't figure out is why they targeted us so specifically. That island isn't special. It's just a patch of gravel in the middle of a river. But those creatures wanted us gone, and they coordinated their efforts from both banks to intimidate us. We've never reported this officially. Who would believe us? But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. 2 Sasquatch creatures trapped us on that island and let us know, in no uncertain terms, that we weren't welcome. Needless to say, we haven't been back to that island. We still fish, but we stick to populated areas now, and we never, ever stay after dark. Some places belong to them, not us. That night taught me that there are things in the forests that we've denied or forgotten, things that haven't forgotten us. Sometimes I still wake up hearing those roars echoing in my head. I can still see that massive silhouette standing on the bank watching us, and I wonder if somewhere in the forests along the Umpqua River they remember us too. Story 6. I've been debating whether to post this for almost 10 years now. Part of me wants to forget the whole thing ever happened, but I can't sleep some nights without seeing that thing in my dreams. My cousin Brandon and I have barely talked about it since it happened, but we both know what we saw. I'm not crazy, and I'm not making this up. I wish I was. It was late September 2013, just before the leaves really started changing. Brandon and I had been riding dirt bikes in the hills around Elkins, West Virginia, since we were teenagers. The Monongahela National Forest was basically our backyard growing up. We knew those trails like the back of our hands, or at least we thought we did. That weekend was supposed to be just another one of our regular trips. We'd done it dozens of times before. We loaded up our dirt bikes in the back of my beat-up Ford F-150, packed some camping gear, and headed out Friday after work. The plan was simple. Camp out, ride all day Saturday, maybe Sunday morning too, then head back home. We found this perfect spot off a gravel access road, just a small clearing near an old fire road where we could set up our small tent and have a fire. Nothing fancy. I remember how quiet it was that night, just the usual forest sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, normal stuff. Saturday morning we got up early, had some coffee and protein bars, and hit the trails around 7. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold, that crisp fall air that makes you feel alive. We'd been riding for about an hour, maybe 5 miles down this rough trail we'd ridden a bunch of times before. It was pretty technical in spots. Lots of rocks, some steep sections, but nothing we couldn't handle. We stopped at this dry creek bed to catch our breath and have some water. That's when I first noticed something was off. There was this low rumbling sound in the distance. At first I thought maybe it was thunder, but the sky was clear blue. Then I wondered if it was another vehicle, maybe an ATV, but it didn't have that mechanical sound. It was deeper, more organic. "You hear that?" I asked Brandon. He nodded, looking around. We cut our engines to listen better, and that's when we heard it clearly. Branches breaking, something moving through the underbrush, not like a squirrel or even a deer. This sounded heavy. "Probably just a bear," Brandon said, but he didn't sound convinced. "We've encountered black bears before. They usually run the other way when they hear engines." We decided to keep going, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my gut. About 15 minutes later, I saw something move just off the trail. Something big, ducking into the trees. I only caught a glimpse, but it was enough to make me slow down. "Did you see that?" I shouted to Brandon, who was riding ahead of me. He shook his head and kept going. I sped up to catch him, telling myself it was probably just a bear or maybe an elk. But deep down, I knew whatever I saw was moving on 2 legs, not 4. We reached the end of the trail around noon, just a turnaround point where the path got too overgrown to continue. We took a quick break, had some beef jerky and water, and decided to head back to camp for lunch. That's when everything went to hell. We'd only been riding back for maybe 2 minutes when I heard it. A roar that made my blood freeze. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a mountain lion, it wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. It was deep and guttural and so goddamn angry, it made the hair on my arms stand up. And it was loud, like it drowned out our engines for a second. I looked at Brandon and saw the same terror on his face that I was feeling. Before we could even say anything, we heard crashing sounds. Like something massive was plowing through the forest, snapping branches and small trees like they were nothing. Brandon yelled, "Go!" and we both twisted our throttles to the max. The trail was narrow and winding, with trees close on both sides. We were pushing our bikes as fast as we dared, but the sounds kept pace with us. Whatever it wasn't falling behind. It was running parallel to the trail, crashing through the woods beside us. The worst part was the roaring. It kept happening over and over, each one sounding angrier than the last. I've been hunting all my life. I've heard bears, wolves, mountain lions, you name it. This wasn't anything like that. It sounded almost human, but not quite. Deeper, more powerful, and with this edge of rage that made my skin crawl. At one point I glanced to my right and saw trees swaying, not from wind, but because something huge was pushing through them. Something tall enough to make the upper branches move. When we got back to that dry creek bed, Brandon suddenly stopped. I skidded to a halt next to him. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed. "We need to keep moving." "Is it still following us?" he asked, his face pale and sweaty. We cut our engines to listen, and for a second there was nothing, just silence. Then we heard heavy breathing, like something was recovering from a run. And that's when we saw it. About 50 yards up the slope on the other side of the creek bed, standing between two large oak trees, was... I don't even know how to describe it. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark hair or fur, but not like a bear. It was standing upright on 2 legs, with arms that hung down almost to its knees. The body was thick and powerful, like a bodybuilder but wider, and its head, Jesus, its head looked like it was sitting directly on its shoulders, almost no neck visible. We both froze, unable to move, unable to speak. It was watching us. I could feel it studying us, even though I couldn't make out its eyes clearly from that distance. Then it let out another roar, so loud that I felt it in my chest, and slammed one of its arms into a nearby tree with such force that a branch snapped off. And then it started moving downhill toward us, picking up speed with each step. "Go, go, go," I screamed, kick-starting my bike. Brandon was already ahead of me, jumping the creek bed and gunning it down the trail. I was right behind him, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. The trail back was the most terrifying 2 miles of my life. The thing was right behind us the whole time, crashing through the woods, parallel to the trail. Sometimes it would disappear for a few seconds, then reappear closer than before, like it knew shortcuts through the forest. At one point, I felt something hit me hard in the back, not enough to knock me off my bike, but enough to make me swerve. It had thrown something at me, a rock or a branch, I don't know. I didn't look back to check. Brandon and I were riding faster than we ever had before, taking risks on jumps and corners that would have been suicide under normal circumstances, but we had no choice. That thing was relentless. It wasn't until we got to the thinner woods near the gravel road that it finally seemed to back off. I don't know if it didn't want to venture that close to the road or what, but the crashing sounds faded. We didn't stop to find out if it was really gone. When we got back to our campsite, we didn't even talk. We just threw the bikes into the truck bed without strapping them down, grabbed whatever gear was in plain sight and got the hell out of there. I don't think either of us took a full breath until we hit pavement 20 minutes later. We were almost back to Elkins when Brandon finally spoke. "What the fuck was that, Tyler?" I shook my head. "I don't know." "That wasn't a bear." "No," I agreed. It wasn't. It wasn't a person in a suit either. I almost laughed at how absurd that suggestion was. No human could move like that, or make those sounds, or be that big. We fell silent again. What else was there to say? I've spent my whole life in those mountains. I've encountered black bears, elk, moose, mountain lions, all the wildlife you'd expect. I know what they sound like, how they move, how they behave. What chased us that day wasn't any of those. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. It was hunting us. When we got back to town, we debated whether to report it, but what would we say? That we saw Bigfoot? That some monster chased us? We'd be laughed out of the sheriff's office. Besides, part of me didn't want anyone else going out there looking for it. That thing was dangerous, more dangerous than anything I've ever encountered. It's been almost 10 years now, and I still haven't been back to that part of the forest. Brandon moved to Ohio a year later, says it was for a job, but I think he just wanted to get away from those hills. We don't talk about that day. but sometimes when we get together and have a few beers, I catch him looking out at the tree line with the same fear I still feel. I still ride dirt bikes, but never alone and never in thick woods. I stick to open trails where I can see what's around me. The nightmares have mostly stopped, but sometimes I'll wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that roar in my head. Sometimes I'm convinced it's out there in my backyard, watching my house, waiting. I know how this all sounds. If someone told me this story 10 years ago, I'd think they were full of shit or crazy. I don't care if anyone believes me. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I just needed to finally get this off my chest. I don't know what we saw that day. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some unknown species. I don't have a name for it. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it wanted to hurt us. And the scariest part? It's still out there in those woods. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the trees outside my window, I swear I can hear it breathing. Story 7. I've been carrying this story for over 20 years now, and I've never told it outside my family. My name is Milton Brint, and back in 1901, something happened to me, my brother Taylor, and our friend Tom Lukens that I still can't explain. I'm an old man now, and I want to get this off my chest before I take it to my grave. It was a wet July night, raining on and off like it does in Pennsylvania summers. The three of us were heading out coon hunting in Stewart's woods, just outside Pensbury Township in Chester County. We'd been hunting those woods since we were boys, knew every hollow and creek, or at least we thought we did. That night started like any other hunt. We had our bullseye lamps, our shotguns, and our 4 coonhounds, Blue, Sadie, Rex, and my favorite, Old Jake. Those dogs were the best trackers in the county, never failed us once before that night. We set out around 9 in the evening, after the rain had let up some. The ground was soft and muddy, making a sucking sound with every step. The air felt heavy, like it does before a big storm, and there was this weird stillness. No crickets, no nightbirds, nothing. I remember Tom mentioning it, saying, "Mighty quiet tonight, ain't it?" But Taylor and I just figured the rain had hushed everything up. The dogs picked up a scent about an hour in, barking and howling as they took off into the thicker part of the woods. We followed their sound, our lamps cutting yellow circles through the darkness. The trees were dripping with rainwater, and every now and then a fat drop would hit the back of my neck, making me jump. I remember checking my pocket watch. It was just past 10:30 when everything changed. The dogs' barking stopped. Just stopped. One minute they were in full cry, the next, nothing. 20 years of hunting, and I'd never heard dogs go quiet like that mid-chase. "What in tarnation?" Taylor muttered, and we picked up our pace, splashing through puddles and pushing aside wet branches that slapped back at our faces. Then we heard it. The whining. Not the excited whining of dogs that have treed something, but a sound of pure fear. We found them about 100 yards ahead, all 4 huddled together, tails between their legs, trembling so hard you could see it in the lamplight. Old Jake, who'd faced down angry bears without flinching, was pressed against my legs, whimpering like a pup. "What's got into them?" Tom asked, kneeling down to check Sadie. The dog was shaking so badly she could hardly stand. "They must have treed something," I said, though I'd never seen them act this way about any coon or possum. We tried to get the dogs to lead us on, but they wouldn't budge. Finally, Taylor spotted their tracks leading further north, so we decided to follow them ourselves. The dogs stayed right at our heels, which was unusual. Normally, they'd be eager to get back on the trail. The rain started coming down harder as we walked, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Our lamps cast weird dancing shadows that seemed to move between the trees. I remember thinking the woods felt different that night, like we were walking in a place we'd never been before, though we'd hunted there since childhood. About a quarter-mile further, we came to a big old cedar tree. It stood alone in a small clearing, taller than the others around it. Something about it just didn't look right. In the yellow light from our lamps, the bark seemed to glisten like it was coated in something slick. That's when we heard it, a sound coming from high up in the branches. It wasn't like any animal noise I'd ever heard before. It was... I still don't know how to describe it properly. A kind of low, dismal moan, but with something like words mixed in, though no words any human tongue could make. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. "Hello up there," Tom called, raising his lamp higher. No response, just that awful moaning sound. "Probably just a coon," Taylor said, but his voice shook. None of us believed it was a raccoon. Then the tree began to shake. Not like when a small animal moves through branches. The whole damn tree was trembling. Something big was up there, and it was moving down toward us. The dogs went crazy, barking and howling and trying to run, but they were so scared they just circled around our legs, nearly tripping us. I grabbed old Jake by his collar, trying to calm him down, but he was beyond reasoning with. I raised my lamp higher, trying to see what was in that tree. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the branches, something far too big to be a coon or even a bear. Whatever it was coming down fast. Then it happened. There was a loud crack, like a branch breaking, followed by a heavy thud as something fell partway down the tree. In that instant, all three of our lamps went out at once. Not like they were blown out by the wind. They just died, all together, leaving us in pitch darkness with the rain coming down and something large thrashing in the tree above us. In the darkness, I could hear heavy breathing that wasn't coming from any of us or the dogs. It was deep and raspy, like something fighting for air. Then came another crack and a louder thud as whatever it was fell the rest of the way down. Lightning flashed at that exact moment, and I swear on my mother's grave, what I saw in that split second of light will haunt me until the day I die. It was only about 15 feet away from us, getting to its feet. It had the head and neck of a man, or something man-like, but the body was all wrong. It was massive, covered in dark fur, with arms too long and legs bent wrong. The face, God help me, the face was almost human, but twisted somehow, with eyes that caught the lightning and reflected it back like a cat's. When the lightning faded, leaving us in darkness again, Tom let out a yell that didn't even sound human. We just ran. I don't remember dropping my shotgun, but I must have because my hands were empty as I crashed through the underbrush. The dogs were ahead of us now, yelping and howling as they fled. I couldn't tell if the thing was following us. The rain was pouring down so hard now that it drowned out any sound except our own desperate breathing and the occasional crack of thunder. We ran until our lungs burned, not even knowing which direction we were heading. By some miracle, we ended up back at the edge of the woods where we'd left our wagon. Taylor was bleeding from scratches all over his face where branches had whipped him. Tom had lost his hat and one boot. I was soaked to the bone and shaking so hard I could barely climb onto the wagon. None of the dogs were with us. They'd scattered into the night, driven by terror. We rode back to town in silence, too shocked to even discuss what we'd seen. It wasn't until we reached Tom's house that Taylor finally spoke up. "We don't tell nobody about this," he said. "They'll think we're crazy or drunk." Tom and I just nodded. What could we say? That we'd seen some kind of man-beast in Stewart's woods, that it had somehow put out our lamps all at once, that our dogs, trained hunting animals, had run off in blind panic. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing in the lightning flash, its too human face with those glowing eyes. I jumped at every sound, thinking it had followed us home. The dogs started showing up about a week later. First came Rex, then Sadie and Blue. They were half-starved and still skittish, flinching at every sound and refusing to go near the edge of the woods. Old Jake was the last to return. 9 days after that night, he was never the same dog again. Used to sleep at the foot of my bed, but after that night, He would only stay in the kitchen, as far from the windows as possible, and he would never hunt again. Just the sight of a hunting rifle would send him cowering under the porch. Tom moved away that winter, said he couldn't stand living so close to Stewart's woods anymore. Taylor and I stayed, but we never went hunting in those woods again. In fact, I've never been coon hunting since that night. People in town noticed the change in us. There were questions about why 3 of the most dedicated hunters in the county suddenly gave it up. We told them we were getting too old for tramping through the woods at night. Some believed us, some didn't. There were stories after that night. Other folks reporting strange sounds from Stewart's woods, a logger claiming he saw something watching him from the trees, 2 children who went missing for a day and came back talking about a big hairy man who followed them but wouldn't come out of the shadows. To this day, I don't know what we encountered in those woods. I've read about wild men and forest creatures in books, trying to make sense of it. Nothing quite matches what we saw. Sometimes I almost convinced myself it was just the lightning playing tricks, that we were spooked by nothing more than a bear or a mountain lion. But then I remember the sound it made, the way it moved, those eyes in the darkness. And I know it was something else entirely. I'm an old man now. Taylor passed 5 years back, and Tom died in 1915 out in Ohio. I'm the only one left who saw it, who knows what's really in Stewart's woods. I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, thinking I hear that dismal moaning sound outside my window. And on rainy nights in July, I double-check my locks and keep a lantern burning till dawn, because whatever was in that cedar tree, whatever fell to the ground in front of us that night, I can't shake the feeling it's still out there. And sometimes, when I look out toward the woods, I swear I can see eyes watching me from the darkness. Patient eyes that have been waiting all these years, and they'll keep waiting, long after I'm gone. Story 8. I've been hesitating to share this for 12 years now. Most people I've told think I'm either lying or that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw that day in May of 2011, and it still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I live in western Montana, about 20 minutes from Victor. Anyone who knows this area understands how wild and untamed parts of it still are. I've always been comfortable in the woods, grew up hunting and fishing, spent more time outdoors than in. I'm not the type to scare easily. That spring, I was excited to take my son Jake mushroom hunting. He was 7 at the time, full of energy and questions about everything. May is prime morel season here, and I'd been teaching him how to spot the honeycomb pattern and telling him about how delicious they are when you fry them up with a bit of butter. He was so excited about finding his first brain mushrooms, as he called them. We headed out on a Tuesday morning. The weather was perfect. About 60 degrees, partly cloudy, with that fresh spring smell in the air. I chose a spot I knew well, a little secluded area near the Bitterroot River. It's on public land, but far enough off the main trails that most people don't bother going there. The soil is rich, and after a good rain, you can usually find a decent haul of morels. We parked my old Ford pickup at a small pull-off and grabbed our mesh bags. Jake was bouncing around, pointing at everything. I remember thinking how good it felt to share this with him, to pass down knowledge my dad had shared with me. We followed a small game trail down toward the river, then veered east into a mixed forest area with plenty of dead elms and cottonwoods, prime morel territory. After about 20 minutes of walking, we came to a gentle slope leading down to a small creek that feeds into the Bitterroot. I told Jake to stay where I could see him and started scanning the ground. The trick with morels is to walk slowly and train your eyes to spot their distinctive shape. It's almost like your brain has to switch to a different mode of seeing. We'd been hunting for about an hour and our bags were starting to fill up nicely. Jake was so proud every time he found one, calling me over with pure excitement in his voice. I remember checking my watch. It was around 11:30 in the morning when Jake wandered a bit farther down the slope, closer to the creek. "Dad, I found a bunch over here." he called out, his voice echoing slightly against the hillside. I headed over to where he was standing, about 30 yards from me. He'd found a little patch of morels growing near the base of a fallen log. I knelt down next to him, showing him how to cut them at the base with his pocket knife instead of pulling them up roots and all. That's when I felt it. I can't explain exactly what it was, but something made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was that primal feeling, that sixth sense we all have deep down that warns us when something's watching. I felt it before when hiking in grizzly country, but this was different, more intense. I stood up slowly and scanned our surroundings. The forest seemed quieter than it had just moments before. No bird calls, no squirrels chattering, just the soft sound of the creek. I turned my head to look up the slope to our right, and that's when I saw the movement from the corner of my eye. About 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a large ponderosa pine. At first, my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. A bear. No, the shape was all wrong. It was standing upright, completely vertical against the tree, maybe another mushroom hunter in dark clothes. But as my eyes focused, I realized what I was looking at was like nothing I'd ever seen before. I could only see parts of it, a knee, part of a shoulder, and the side of its head as it peered around the tree. The creature was massive, much taller than me, and I'm 6'2". It was completely covered in dark, almost black hair. Not fur like a bear, but hair. Longer in some places, especially around what I assumed was its head and shoulders. What struck me most was its face, or what little I could see of it. The hair grew across its face too, but around its eyes I could make out lighter skin. And those eyes, they blinked. They actually blinked as it watched us. They were deep-set, dark and unmistakably intelligent. Time seemed to freeze. I don't know if we stared at each other for 2 seconds or 20. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct in my body was screaming danger, but not in the way it does when you spot a mountain lion or bear. This was different, a deep, ancient kind of fear I'd never experienced before. Then it moved. The movement was smooth, deliberate, and completely silent. It simply shifted its weight and slid behind the tree out of my sight. That broke my trance. I grabbed Jake's arm, probably harder than I should have. "We need to go now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But Dad, I just found more." "Leave them. We're going right now." I scooped him up with one arm, our mushroom bags in the other, and started walking quickly back the way we had come. I didn't run. Something told me not to make sudden movements, but I moved as fast as I could while trying to appear calm. Jake was confused and started to protest, but something in my face must have told him this was serious. "What's wrong?" he whispered. "I think I saw an animal, a big one. We need to get back to the truck." I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, listening for any sound of pursuit, but there was nothing. Just that unnatural silence that had fallen over the forest. It took us about 15 minutes to get back to the truck, though it felt like hours. I buckled Jake into his seat, threw our bags in the back and got in. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. "What kind of animal was it, Dad?" Jake asked as I started the engine. I didn't know what to tell him. "I'm not sure, buddy. Maybe a bear." The lie came easily, but I knew damn well it wasn't a bear. No bear stands that way, has that shape, or watches you with those eyes. I should have driven straight home. That would have been the sensible thing to do, but something made me stop when we reached the main road. I couldn't just leave without knowing, without confirming what I'd seen. I needed proof, something concrete to tell myself I wasn't losing my mind. "Stay in the truck," I told Jake. "Lock the doors. I'll be right back." I went to the toolbox in the truck bed and took out my shotgun. I always kept it there during mushroom season. Not unusual in Montana, where you might encounter a bear or mountain lion. I loaded it, tucked extra shells in my pocket, and hesitated. "Where are you going?" Jake's voice was small, worried. "Just back a little ways." I dropped something, 5 minutes, I promise. I walked back down the trail, shotgun ready, senses on high alert. I wasn't planning to confront whatever I'd seen. I'm not that stupid. But I needed to check, to see if there was any evidence. When I reached the area where we'd been picking, I circled around to where I'd seen the creature. The silence in the forest was still unnerving. I approached the big ponderosa cautiously, scanning in all directions. There was no sign of the creature, but when I reached the tree and looked down at the ground around it, my blood ran cold. There in the soft earth near the creek were footprints. But not human footprints, not even close. They were huge, at least 16 inches long and proportionally wide. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made them was heavy. The heel was flat, not curved like a human foot, and the width across the toes was remarkable. 5 toes spread wider apart than human toes would be. The stride length between prints was massive, easily over 4 feet. I stared at those prints, trying to process what I was seeing. I'm an experienced outdoorsman. I know what bear tracks look like, what elk, deer, and every other animal in these woods leave behind. These weren't like anything I'd ever seen. I took a few shaky photos with my flip phone, though they didn't capture the scale well. I should have put something next to them for reference, but my mind wasn't working clearly. All I wanted was to get back to my son and get the hell out of there. As I turned to leave, I felt that sensation again of being watched. I scanned the trees, the hillside, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling was overwhelming. I hurried back to the truck, relieved to find Jake safe inside, playing with the radio dials. "Did you find what you lost?" he asked innocently. "Yeah, buddy, I did." I started the engine and drove away fast enough to kick up gravel. That night, after Jake was in bed, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. I've spent my whole life in these mountains. I know every animal that calls them home. But what I saw that day doesn't exist in any field guide. The thing is, it didn't act aggressive. It could have charged us, attacked us. We were completely vulnerable, but it didn't. It seemed more interested in remaining hidden, in watching us. That almost makes it more unsettling somehow. I've spent countless hours since then researching, trying to find an explanation. I've read about black bears standing on hind legs, about misidentifications of known animals, but none of that fits what I saw. The height, the posture, the completely upright stance, the hair covering its entire body. It all points to one conclusion, as crazy as it sounds. I believe I saw a Sasquatch that day. I know how that sounds. If someone had told me this story before it happened, I'd have laughed in their face, but I know what I saw. I haven't been back to that spot since. Not once in 12 years. I still take Jake mushroom hunting, but we stay to well-traveled areas now. He's 19 now, and doesn't remember much about that day, thankfully. I never told him the full truth about what I saw. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching other hikers and mushroom hunters from behind trees. I wonder if anyone else has seen it, and like me, been too afraid of ridicule to come forward. I don't have any answers. I just know that there are things in these mountains that science hasn't explained yet. And on that spring day in 2011, I came face to face with one of them. I can still see those eyes when I close mine at night, intelligent, curious, and so utterly non-human that it shakes me to my core. Story 9. I've been meaning to write this down for months, but I keep putting it off because every time I think about it, I get this weird feeling in my stomach. My wife Rebecca finally convinced me to share what happened to us, so here goes. Last summer, on August 11th, my wife and I were finishing up a 40-mile hike along the Timberline Trail in Mount Hood National Forest. We're experienced hikers, not experts or anything, but we've done our fair share of backcountry camping. This trip was supposed to be a celebration of our 5th anniversary. We both loved the outdoors and wanted to challenge ourselves. The day had been brutal. The trail along Mount Hood has these crazy elevation changes, and by the time we found a decent spot to camp, we were completely wiped out. Our legs were jelly, and I had a blister the size of a quarter on my left heel. We set up our tent on this small flat area with a slight slope below us, leading down into denser forest. There was nobody else around for miles as far as we could tell. We made a simple dinner on our camp stove, watched the sunset, and crashed by 9:30, not even bothering to stay up to see the stars. I fell asleep instantly, but woke up suddenly around midnight. At first, I thought it was just my bladder. Typical middle-of-the-night camping stuff, but then I heard it. Knocking sounds coming from the forest slope below our tent. Not like random branch knocking or animal sounds I've heard before. These were deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 4 knocks, pause, 5 knocks, then silence for maybe 2 minutes before it started again. I laid there for a few minutes trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a woodpecker. No, it was the middle of the night. A branch hitting something in the wind, but there was barely any breeze, and the knocks were too consistent. I felt Rebecca stir beside me. "You hear that?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, feeling relieved I wasn't imagining things, but also more freaked out because it confirmed something weird was happening. We both stayed completely still, just listening. The knocking continued with this eerie precision, always from the same spot, maybe 100 yards downhill from our camp. 3 to 5 knocks, evenly spaced, then a break, then another sequence. It wasn't frantic or aggressive, just methodical. That's what made it so unsettling. I fumbled for my headlamp and checked the time on my watch, 12:23. I asked Rebecca if she wanted me to go check it out, but even as I offered, I was hoping she'd say no. She grabbed my arm hard and said, "Don't you dare leave this tent." I was secretly relieved. We debated about what to do, make noise to scare off whatever it was, stay quiet. I decided to unzip the tent just enough to peek out. The night was clear with a quarter moon, but the forest below us was just a wall of darkness. Our campfire had burned down to just a few glowing embers, casting almost no light. I couldn't see anything moving down there, but the knocking continued. I zipped the tent back up, feeling exposed. We had bear spray, a hunting knife, and a small hatchet for firewood, but none of that felt very reassuring against whatever this was. The knocking wasn't threatening exactly, but there was something so intentional about it that made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself it was just another hiker messing with us, but we hadn't seen anyone else on the trail for the last day and a half. Plus, who would hike through dense forest in the middle of the night just to knock on trees near our campsite? After about an hour of this, I was exhausted enough that I actually dozed off despite the noise. Rebecca later told me she stayed awake the entire time, growing more and more uneasy. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, she did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. She took our small camping pot and a spoon and softly tapped out a similar pattern. 3 soft knocks, and the forest went completely silent. The knocking stopped mid-sequence. For about 5 minutes, there was nothing. Rebecca was frozen, pot still in hand, afraid to move. Then, from what seemed like a slightly different position, maybe closer, the knocking started again. 3 knocks, pause, 5 knocks. Rebecca woke me up, practically hyperventilating. When she told me what happened, I felt ice in my veins. Whatever was out there had heard her, responded by stopping, and then deliberately continued its pattern. It was listening to us. I don't consider myself superstitious or easily spooked, but something about the situation felt wrong on a primal level. The forest, which had felt so peaceful during the day, now seemed to be closing in around us. The darkness outside our thin nylon tent felt like it had substance, like it was watching us. The knocking continued for hours. Sometimes it would stop for 10 or 15 minutes, making us think it was over, then start again, just as we began to relax. By 3 in the morning, I was wide awake again, and Rebecca and I were just sitting there, holding each other's hands, listening. I tried to think of every possible explanation. Maybe it was water dripping in a cave, but there was no rain, and the pattern was too irregular yet organized, some kind of bird or animal. But what animal knocks in patterns and responds when you mimic it? A person playing a prank? But we were miles from any trailhead, and nobody could have followed us without us noticing. Around 4 in the morning, the knocking finally stopped for good. Gradually, the normal forest sounds returned, the occasional rustle of small animals, distant hoots of an owl. As the sky began to lighten ever so slightly, I felt the tension slowly drain from my body. Rebecca had eventually fallen asleep against my shoulder, completely exhausted. When the sun came up, we were both awake, groggy and on edge. We didn't talk much as we broke down camp in record time. I wanted to go investigate the area where the knocking had come from, but Rebecca was adamant about leaving immediately. Looking at her face, pale and drawn from lack of sleep, I didn't argue. As we shouldered our packs, I took one last look at the forest slope below our campsite. In the morning light, it looked completely ordinary. Dense trees, underbrush, nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been tested somehow or communicated with. The hike out was tense and fast. We barely stopped for breaks, both of us pushing to get back to the trailhead and our car. When we finally reached civilization, it was like crossing some invisible boundary back to safety. We stopped at the first diner we found and, over coffee and eggs, finally talked about what happened. That wasn't natural, Rebecca said quietly. Those knocks were intelligent. I nodded, relieved she felt the same way. I've been hiking these mountains for 15 years and I've never heard anything like that. Since then, we've done some research. There are forums and websites where people share similar experiences, mysterious knocking in remote forests, often in sequences of 3 to 5. Some attribute it to Bigfoot or other cryptids, others to more supernatural explanations. Park rangers and wildlife experts we've asked just shake their heads, offering weak explanations about woodpeckers or falling branches. But none of those explanations fit what we experienced. The knocking was too regular, too responsive, too purposeful. It felt like something was trying to communicate or lure us out of our tent. The fact that it responded to Rebecca's mimicry proves it was listening and aware of us. We haven't been back to Mount Hood since then, though we've continued hiking in other areas. Sometimes at night, especially when we're camping, I'll wake up suddenly, straining to hear if there's knocking in the distance. Rebecca says she has nightmares where the knocking is right outside our bedroom window, getting louder and louder. The thing that bothers me most isn't the fear I felt that night. It's the uncertainty. What was out there? What did it want? Why did it spend hours knocking near our campsite? Was it trying to communicate, threaten, or simply observe our reaction? I don't know if I'll ever have answers. All I know is that there was something in those woods that night that doesn't fit into my understanding of the natural world. Something that was aware of us, that responded to us, that communicated in its own strange way. And sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I catch myself listening for that pattern again. 3 knocks, 4 knocks, 5 knocks, and wondering what I'd do if I heard it again. I've never told this story publicly before. People think you're crazy when you talk about unexplained things in the woods, but I know what I heard, what we both heard, and I know that whatever was knocking that night, it wasn't random, it wasn't natural, and it wasn't human. Has anyone else experienced something like this? I keep thinking about going back, maybe with recording equipment to see if we can capture it. But every time I suggest it, Rebecca just gives me this look, and I know she's right. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. Whatever was communicating with us that night on Mount Hood, maybe it's better we don't answer back. Story 10. I've never really told this story to many people. Most would probably think I'm crazy or making it up for attention. But I swear, on everything I care about, what I'm about to share happened exactly as I remember it. It was March 1982. I was 26 and working at the Simmons Dairy Farm, nestled between Deersville and Tippecanoe in Harrison County, Ohio. The pay wasn't great, but I needed the work, and Mr. Simmons was fair enough as bosses go. That morning started like any other. My alarm went off at 4:15, and I dragged myself out of bed, splashed some cold water on my face, and threw on my work clothes: thick canvas pants, thermal shirt, heavy flannel, and my work boots. It was still dark out when I left my small rental house, and the cold hit me like a wall when I stepped outside. There was a heavy frost that morning, the kind that crunches underfoot and makes everything look like it's been dusted with sugar. I arrived at the farm around 4:45. The sky was still pitch black, with just a hint of dark blue starting to creep in from the east. The first job of the day was always feeding the dairy heifers in the far pen. I grabbed the feed cart and started making my way across the property. The only sounds were the squeak of the cartwheels and my boots breaking through the frost with each step. The farm had this little creek running through it, separating the main barn area from the far pastures where we kept the younger heifers. There was a small wooden bridge we used to cross it. I remember the boards creaking under my weight as I pushed the cart across. It must have been just about 5 in the morning. I had just started spreading feed along the troughs when I heard it, a grunt, not an animal grunt like I was used to hearing from the cattle, but something that sounded human, but deeper. It caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting anyone else to be out there that early. I straightened up and looked around, thinking maybe Mr. Simmons had come out early for some reason. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, just on the other side of the creek, there was a figure standing completely still. At first I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me in the dim light, but then it moved slightly, and I realized I was looking at something real. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing was at least a foot taller than me. Even at that distance, in the pre-dawn light, I could tell it was massive, not just tall, but broad. The shape was human-like, but the proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were too wide, the arms too long. We just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds looking at each other. I couldn't make out any facial features. It was too dark and too far away. But I could feel it watching me. I know that sounds crazy, but I could feel its eyes on me. Then it just turned, slowly, not like it was startled or afraid, but deliberate, like it had decided it was done looking at me. It started walking toward the wooded area at the edge of the pen. Its gait was smooth but strange, longer strides than a person would take, but not rushed. I was frozen in place. I couldn't move, couldn't call out. I just stood there with the feed scoop in my hand, watching this thing walk away. The weirdest part was how clearly I could hear its footsteps crunching through the frost. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow and heavy. The sound carried in the cold morning air for nearly a minute. Then I heard the fence boards at the edge of the property creaking, not breaking, just straining under significant weight. And then silence. What struck me as bizarre was that the cattle hadn't reacted at all. Usually, if there's a stray dog or even a person they don't recognize, they get skittish. But the heifers just kept nosing at their feed like nothing had happened. I finished my work in a daze, constantly looking over my shoulder. After the morning milking was done, around 8:30, I went back to where I'd seen the figure. By then, the sun was up and the frost had melted away. I looked for tracks, broken branches, anything. But there was nothing. The ground was too soft from the melted frost to hold any clear impressions. I never told Mr. Simmons about it. What would I say? Hey, I saw some giant humanoid thing by the creek this morning. He'd have thought I was on drugs or something, but I know what I saw even if I don't know what it was. For years, I tried to convince myself it was just a person, maybe some tall guy trespassing. But deep down, I knew better. No person moves like that. No person makes the fence creak like that just by climbing over it. I pushed the memory away and got on with my life. I left that farm job about a year later for better pay at a factory in Steubenville, got married, had kids, the usual stuff, but I never forgot what I saw that frosty March morning. Then, in 2010, 28 years after that first incident, something happened that brought it all rushing back. It was late October or early November bow hunting season. I was in a tree stand on some private property not far from where the old Simmons farm had been. The stand overlooked a hayfield with woods on three sides, a perfect spot for deer. I'd been sitting there since about 3 in the afternoon. The sun was starting to get low, that golden hour when deer usually start moving. I had seen a few does at the edge of the field, cautiously making their way out to graze. That's when I heard it, a scream unlike anything I've ever heard before or since. It wasn't human, wasn't a bobcat or coyote, or any animal I could identify. It was deep and powerful and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The only way I can describe it is primal, like something ancient calling out. The 3 does that had been feeding about 60 yards from my stand bolted immediately. 1 second they were calmly grazing, the next they were gone, white tails flashing as they disappeared into the trees. But the screaming didn't stop. It continued, paused, then started again. This went on for about 15 minutes. Sometimes it seemed closer, sometimes farther away, like whatever was making the sound was moving through the woods. I wish I could say I was brave enough to investigate, but I wasn't. That sound, it did something to me on an instinctive level. All I could think about was getting out of there. I climbed down from my stand, packed up my bow, and got back to my truck as fast as I could. The screaming followed me almost all the way back. I tried to tell myself it was just some animal I wasn't familiar with. Maybe a bear, though bears aren't common in that part of Ohio. Maybe someone playing a prank, though who would be out in those woods making sounds like that? Whatever rational explanation I came up with, none of them felt right. The following year, in the fall of 2011, I went back to the same spot. I brought my teenage son with me this time, partly for company and partly because I thought having someone else there might make me feel more secure. We set up in the same tree stand, him sitting just below me on a platform I had added. It was a quiet afternoon. We saw a few squirrels, some birds, but no deer. As dusk approached, the woods took on that special kind of stillness that happens just before dark. That's when we heard it. Something moving down the hill through the trees to our right. Not the light footsteps of a deer, but something heavier, breaking branches and displacing leaves. We both froze, my son looking up at me with wide eyes. I put my finger to my lips, signaling him to stay quiet. Whatever it was, stopped moving. Then came a sound that seems ridiculous to mention, but it's what we heard. The unmistakable sound of something urinating, a heavy, forceful stream hitting the forest floor, going on much longer than you'd expect. The sound was close, maybe 30 yards away, but in the fading light and thick underbrush, we couldn't see what was making it. After that, silence. No more movement, no more sounds. We waited another 20 minutes before deciding to call it a day. Neither of us wanted to be in those woods after dark. On the walk back to the truck, my son asked, "Dad, what was that?" "Probably just a buck," I said, but I didn't believe it. Bucks don't move like that, and they don't, well, go to the bathroom like that. He seemed to accept my explanation, but I could tell he wasn't convinced either. We didn't talk about it after that day, and we never went back to that particular hunting spot. I've spent years trying to make sense of these experiences. I'm not the type to believe in monsters or supernatural stuff. I'm just a regular guy who's lived a mostly ordinary life. But these 3 incidents, especially that first one back in '82, they don't fit into my understanding of the world. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years, always with a healthy dose of skepticism. But after what I've seen and heard, I can't dismiss them entirely anymore. Whatever was standing across that creek on that frosty March morning wasn't human. I don't know what it was, but I know what it wasn't. I'm 67 now, and I've never seen anything like it again. Sometimes I almost convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me, that the pre-dawn light and shadows created a figure that wasn't really there. But then I remember the sound of those heavy footsteps crunching through the frost, and I know it was real. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I'd believe it if someone else told me this story. But it happened, and to this day, I still find myself scanning the tree line when I'm in open country, and I still get a chill down my spine when I hear an unexpected sound in the woods. Story 11. I still can't explain what we saw that night in the Kilder Mountains. It's been 3 months, and my hands still shake when I think about it. I've never been one to believe in monsters or wild tales, but what happened that evening in January changed everything I thought I knew about our world. I was visiting my cousin William in Dunn County for the winter. I'd traveled from Minnesota to help with his lumber business during the busy season. The winter of 1900 had been particularly harsh. Snow piled higher than I'd ever seen, and temperatures that froze your breath before it left your mouth. Still, the work was steady and the pay was good. On January 12th, William suggested we join a small gathering at the Petersons' homestead about 8 miles through the Kilder Mountains. Nothing fancy, he said. Just some folks getting together to chase away the winter blues. Mrs. Peterson was known for her apple cider and sweet rolls, and her husband had recently finished building a new barn they wanted to show off. It seemed like a fine way to spend an evening. There were 6 of us making the journey. William and myself, the Hoffman brothers, John and Thomas, and the Millers, Henry and his wife Sarah. We decided to take 2 sleighs as the snow was too deep for wagons. William and I rode with Henry and Sarah in the larger sleigh, while the Hoffman brothers took a smaller one. We left around 4 in the afternoon, wanting to arrive before dark, but still with enough daylight to make the journey safely. The initial part of our trip was uneventful. The sleigh runners cut through the snow with that familiar, soft hissing sound, and our breath formed clouds in the cold air. We were bundled in thick coats, scarves, and woolen blankets. Sarah had brought a stone container with hot coffee that we passed around, grateful for its warmth. The Kilder Mountains aren't particularly tall or imposing compared to real mountains, but they're rugged and densely forested. In winter, with snow blanketing everything, they take on an eerie, silent quality that's both beautiful and unsettling. The pine trees stood heavy with snow, their branches bowing under the weight. As we traveled deeper into the hills, the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long blue shadows across the pristine white landscape. About halfway to the Petersons, we entered a narrow valley. The path tightened between 2 steep slopes, forcing our sleighs to travel in single file. William was driving our sleigh with Henry beside him. Sarah and I sat in the back, facing each other, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The Hoffman brothers followed about 30 yards behind. I remember checking my pocket watch. It was just past 5, and the light was fading fast. That's when William's horses started acting strange. Their ears flicked nervously, and they began to snort and stamp, slowing their pace despite William's urging. He exchanged a worried glance with Henry. "What's got into them?" Henry muttered, reaching for the shotgun he'd brought along, more out of habit than any expectation of trouble. That's when we heard it, a sound I still can't properly describe. It was like a deep, rumbling grunt that ended in something between a howl and a scream. It echoed through the valley, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The horses reared in panic, and William fought to control them. "What in God's name was that?" Sarah whispered, clutching my arm so tightly it hurt. Before anyone could answer, I saw movement on the slope to our right. At first I thought it was snow falling from trees or maybe a deer, but then it emerged from between the pines, and I felt my blood turn to ice. It was massive, standing at least 7 or 8 feet tall. In the dimming light, I couldn't make out details clearly, but its silhouette was unmistakably not human, yet not fully animal either. It moved on 2 legs with a strange, loping gait. Its body appeared covered in dark, shaggy fur, with long arms that hung almost to its knees. The head sat directly on broad shoulders without much of a neck, giving it a hunched appearance. For a moment, none of us moved or spoke. Even the horses went quiet, trembling in their harnesses. The creature stood at the tree line, about 50 yards away, seemingly watching us. Then Henry broke the silence. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, raising his shotgun. That sudden movement seemed to trigger the creature. It let out another of those terrible howls and began running, not away from us, but directly toward our sleigh. Its movement was both awkward and frighteningly fast, kicking up plumes of snow as it charged. William shouted and cracked the reins hard. The horses bolted forward with such force that Sarah and I were thrown against the back of the sleigh. I heard the Hoffman brothers yelling behind us, their horses also panicking. I clutched the side of the sleigh and turned to look back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The creature was gaining on us. In the chaos, Henry stood up, trying to aim his shotgun despite the sleigh's violent lurching. "Sit down!" William screamed at him, but Henry was beyond hearing. The sleigh hit a deep drift, jolting violently. Henry lost his balance and fell backwards, the shotgun discharging into the air with a deafening crack. That shot changed everything. The creature suddenly veered off its path toward us, changing direction so abruptly it almost fell. It scrambled up the opposite slope with astonishing speed, disappearing into the trees. The last I saw was its massive form melting into the shadows, branches cracking and snow falling as it retreated. William didn't slow the horses. We careened through the valley at a terrifying pace, the second sleigh close behind. No one spoke. Sarah was sobbing quietly, and Henry sat pale-faced, still clutching his shotgun. It wasn't until we reached a wider clearing about a mile further that William finally managed to bring the horses under control. As we sat there, breathing hard, the Hoffman brothers pulled alongside us. John's face was ghost white beneath his beard. "Did you see that? Tell me you saw that thing," he kept saying, his voice higher than normal. We all nodded, too shocked to form proper sentences. Thomas Hoffman, always the most level-headed of us, suggested we turn back to town rather than continue to the Petersons. No one argued, but before we turned around, Henry cleared his throat. "We should check," he said quietly. "Make sure it was real." Part of me wanted to refuse, to insist we leave immediately, but another part needed confirmation that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. William reluctantly agreed, and we men decided to walk back a short distance, just to the edge of the clearing, while Sarah stayed with the horses. The 5 of us moved together in a tight group, each scanning the forest around us. No one wanted to admit they were terrified, but I could hear the shallow, rapid breathing of the men beside me. We carried 2 lanterns and both shotguns. The snow had stopped falling, and an unnatural silence hung over the forest. When we reached the spot where we'd seen the creature charge us, we paused. The evidence was undeniable. Huge, unmistakable footprints cut deeply into the snow. Not the round prints of a bear or the narrow tracks of a wolf, but disturbingly human-like impressions that were far too large to belong to any man. I placed my boot next to one for comparison. My foot was dwarfed by the massive imprint. "Look at the stride," Thomas whispered, pointing to the distance between prints. They were spaced nearly twice as far apart as a tall man's would be. We followed them to where the creature had veered away after Henry's shot, tracking them to the base of the opposite slope. The footprints showed where it had scrambled up the hillside, gouging deep furrows in the snow, snapping small saplings like twigs in its path. John knelt to examine one of the clearer prints. 5 toes, he said hoarsely, like a man's foot, but... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We all saw what he meant. The impression suggested something with an opposable thumb, like a gorilla's foot, but elongated and massive. A branch snapped somewhere up on the slope, and we froze. William raised his lantern higher, casting its yellow glow into the trees, but we saw nothing. That was enough for all of us. Without discussing it, we turned and hurried back to the sleighs. The return journey to town was the longest 8 miles of my life. We traveled in tense silence, jumping at every sound. We reached William's home just after 8 o'clock and immediately sent word to the sheriff. By morning, the story had spread throughout Dunn County. The next day, Sheriff Blackwood organized a hunting party. 15 men, including myself and William, returned to the valley. In daylight, with rifles and a large group, my fear gave way to a strange curiosity. The footprints were still there, now partially filled with the light snow that had fallen overnight, but still unmistakable. We followed them for nearly 2 miles, up into the higher reaches of the Kilder Mountains, but the trail eventually disappeared on rocky ground where the snow was sparse. Over the next week, 3 more hunting parties went out. People came from neighboring counties, bringing dogs, and even a man who claimed to be a tracker from Montana. No one found anything beyond those initial tracks. No caves with signs of habitation, no more footprints, no unusual animal carcasses. Nothing. Theories spread like wildfire. Some said it was a bear walking on its hind legs, though no bear tracks were found. Others suggested an escaped gorilla from a traveling circus, but no circuses had reported missing animals. The most disturbing theory came from an old Lakota man who occasionally traded with folks in town. He spoke of ancient stories about tall, hairy men who lived in the remote mountains, beings that were neither animal nor human, who avoided people but would occasionally be seen during particularly harsh winters when game was scarce. As the weeks passed, the excitement gradually died down. No further sightings were reported, and people returned to the daily struggle of surviving the harsh North Dakota winter. Some began to question what we'd actually seen, suggesting mass hysteria or tricks of the fading light. But I know what I saw. Those footprints were real. That howl, that terrible, inhuman sound, still echoes in my nightmares. I've spent hours in the town library reading accounts of similar sightings from trappers and settlers across the territories. There are stories from the Lewis and Clark expedition about wild men described by native tribes, reports from miners in California and Oregon about ape men glimpsed in remote canyons. I'm leaving Dunn County next week, returning to Minnesota when the road's clear. William thinks I'm being foolish, but I can't stay here, not with those mountains looming on the horizon. Not knowing that something is out there, something that shouldn't exist but does. Sometimes at night, I still hear that sound in my dreams, that deep, deep, rumbling howl that seems to come from another time. And I wake up wondering if it's watching us from the darkness of the Kilder Mountains, just waiting for another harsh winter to drive it down from its hidden places once more. Story 12. I still don't know what to make of what happened to us that August in '81. It's been over 40 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. My wife Linda and I were camping on my uncle's property north of the Hooper Reservation in Humboldt County. Beautiful country, totally remote. About 2 miles from the Trinity River in the foothills of the Caddo Mountains. We'd been there plenty of times before without incident. We'd brought our travel trailer. Nothing fancy, just a 17-footer with the basics. My cousin Jeff and his girlfriend Diane were supposed to join us in their tent. The plan was to spend a week fishing, hiking, and just enjoying nature away from everything. Uncle Roy's property was special, 300 acres of pristine forest that had been in the family for generations. No electricity, no running water, just pure wilderness. We arrived on a Tuesday, set up camp in the small clearing where we always stayed. The spot was perfect, surrounded by towering pines and cedars, with a little creek about 50 yards away. As usual, I hung up some bird feeders. a couple suet blocks for the woodpeckers, and a quart-sized hummingbird feeder that Linda insisted on bringing. I secured the suite with wire to keep raccoons from running off with it, something I'd learned from experience. The first couple days were perfect. Jeff and Diane showed up Wednesday afternoon. We fished, hiked, and just enjoyed being away from civilization. The nights were clear and cool, typical Northern California mountain weather. Friday night is when things started getting weird. There was supposed to be a meteor shower, so around 11:30 we all grabbed our sleeping bags and hiked up to this rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile from camp. The spot gave us a perfect view of the night sky with no trees blocking the horizon. We laid out our bags side by side and watched the show. It was incredible. Dozens of shooting stars streaking across the sky every minute. Around midnight, I started getting this weird feeling. Hard to describe exactly, but it was like that feeling when you know someone's staring at you. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I couldn't focus on the meteors anymore. I kept glancing toward the tree line about 30 yards behind us, but it was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. I whispered to Linda, "You feel that?" She just nodded, eyes wide. She felt it too. Jeff and Diane were still watching the sky, pointing out particularly bright meteors, completely oblivious. The feeling got so intense I finally sat up and shined my flashlight toward the trees. Nothing. Just darkness beyond the beam. But I swear something was there, watching us. "I think we should head back," I said, trying to sound casual. Jeff looked annoyed. "Already? The shower's just getting good." "I'm getting cold," Linda said, backing me up even though it wasn't that chilly. Reluctantly, Jeff and Diane packed up their stuff, and we started heading back down the trail to camp. The whole way back, I kept looking over my shoulder, that feeling of being watched never leaving me. When we got within about 100 yards of camp, this smell hit us. God, it was awful. Like rotten eggs mixed with wet animal fur that had been left in the sun for days. Sort of like sulfur and musk combined, but way more powerful than any skunk or bear I'd ever encountered. "What the hell is that?" Jeff covered his nose with his shirt. "Maybe something died," Diane suggested, gagging a little. The smell was so strong it seemed to coat the inside of my mouth. Linda actually threw up a little, turning away and retching. I grabbed the powerful flashlight from the trailer and started scanning the woods surrounding our camp. The smell seemed strongest toward the east side, up the steep slope that led to another ridge. "I'm going to check it out," I said, feeling braver now that we were back near camp. "Are you crazy?" Linda grabbed my arm. "What if it's a bear?" "Bears don't smell like that," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Jeff, always up for anything, grabbed his own flashlight. "I'll come with you." We headed toward the smell, following it up the slope. The ground was covered in dry pine needles that crunched under our feet. About 50 yards from camp, we heard it. Something big moving through the brush up ahead, crashing through the undergrowth. It sounded heavy, breaking branches as it moved rapidly up the mountain. "Hello?" I called out stupidly, as if whatever it was would answer. The crashing got louder, faster, like whatever it was had picked up speed when I called out. Then it faded as it moved further up the mountain. "Probably a bear," Jeff said, but he didn't sound convinced. Bears don't usually run away making that much noise. We went back to camp, and nobody slept well that night. The smell lingered until around 3 in the morning, when a breeze finally cleared it away. The next day, Saturday, we tried to put it behind us. We fished in the morning, hiked a different trail in the afternoon, but there was this tension hanging over everything. We kept looking over our shoulders, jumping at every twig snap in the forest. That evening, around dusk, the smell returned. Fainter, but definitely the same foul odor. This time it seemed to be coming from the narrow trail that led up to the spring where we got our drinking water. Jeff, who'd been drinking beer all afternoon, suddenly got bold. "I'm going to find out what that is, once and for all." Before I could stop him, he grabbed his flashlight and headed toward the trail. I didn't want him going alone, so I followed, and after a moment's hesitation, Linda and Diane came too. The trail was only about 2 feet wide, bordered by thick brush on both sides. The smell got stronger as we hiked up. Jeff was in front, then me, with the women behind. We'd gone maybe 200 yards when Jeff suddenly stopped. "I heard something," he whispered, pointing his light into the brush to our right. Nothing, just dense manzanita and scrub oak. We continued on another 100 yards or so when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The trail was so narrow that anything coming down would have to pass us. But what if it had stepped off the trail when it heard us coming? What if we had just walked past it? The thought hit us all at the same time. Whatever it was could be behind us now. We turned around so fast, we nearly knocked each other over and practically ran back down the trail. Jeff no longer acting brave. Back at camp, we built up the fire bigger than usual and stayed close to it. Nobody wanted to be first to go to bed. We kept hearing things in the darkness beyond the firelight, twigs snapping, brush moving. Could have been anything. Deer, raccoons, the wind, but after what we'd experienced, everything seemed threatening. Around midnight, the smell returned stronger than ever, seeming to circle our camp. We could track its movement by the intensity of the odor. Jeff wanted to chase it again, but I talked him out of it. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to corner it in the dark. Sunday morning dawned clear and calm. The smell was gone, and in the daylight, it was easy to think we'd overreacted. Maybe it had been a bear, or even a mountain lion. The area had both. Then Jeff called from outside Diane's tent. "Guys, you need to see this." Right in front of their tent was the biggest turd I've ever seen. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was about 4 inches in diameter and at least 20 inches long. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. Mostly composed of leafy matter with some berry seeds mixed in, and it hadn't been there the night before. It looked deliberately placed, right where they'd have to step when exiting the tent. "That's not from a bear," Linda said, stating the obvious. "Bear scat is nothing like that." We stood there staring at it, nobody wanting to say what we were thinking, because saying it out loud would make it real, and none of us wanted it to be real. After that, we noticed other things. The sweet blocks I'd wired up for the birds had been torn down overnight. The wire twisted apart like it was nothing. I replaced them using heavier gauge wire, securing them tightly to the tree branches about 7 feet off the ground. The next morning, they were gone again, wire and all. The hummingbird feeder was the strangest thing. Sunday night it was full, a quart of sugar water. Monday morning it was completely empty. The feeder was hanging from a thin branch about 9 feet off the ground, with nothing nearby to climb on. There's no way a raccoon could have reached it without the branch breaking. The branch was intact, but the feeder was empty. Monday night was our last night before heading home. Nobody wanted to stay longer, though nobody would admit why. We sat around the campfire talking about normal things, deliberately avoiding the subject of what had been happening. Around 11, I needed to use the bathroom. Our setup was pretty primitive, just a camp toilet in a small tent about 30 yards from the main camp. I grabbed the flashlight and headed over, trying not to think about what might be watching from the darkness. I was inside the toilet tent when I heard something moving outside. Heavy footsteps circling the small tent. The smell hit me then, that same sulphurous musk, so strong I could taste it. I froze, flashlight clutched in my hand but afraid to move. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent flap. I could hear breathing, deep, heavy breaths. Not animal panting, but slow, deliberate breathing. The tent wall bulged slightly inward, like something was pressing against it. I don't know how long I sat there, heart pounding so loud, I was sure whatever it was could hear it. Finally, I gathered my courage and yanked open the tent flap, thrusting my flashlight out. Nothing was there. But 20 feet away, at the edge of the light's beam, I caught a glimpse of something moving into the trees. Something big, walking upright. The light only caught it for a second before it disappeared into the darkness, but what I saw has haunted me for 40 years. It was tall, at least 7 feet, covered in dark hair, with arms that hung too long for a human. I ran back to camp, probably looking as terrified as I felt. Everyone was already standing, having heard something moving around the perimeter of the camp. We spent that last night huddled together by the fire, nobody sleeping. Twice more we heard heavy footsteps circling just beyond the firelight. The smell would intensify, then fade, only to return from another direction. At first light we packed up and left, not even bothering with breakfast. As we were loading the last of our gear, I found something that made my stomach drop. On the side of the trailer, about 7 feet up, were 4 parallel scratches in the metal. They weren't deep, almost like something had just dragged its fingers across the surface, but they hadn't been there when we arrived. I've never been back to that property. Uncle Roy passed away in 1992, and the land was sold. I've told this story a few times over the years, usually getting skeptical looks in return. Linda doesn't like talking about it at all. I still don't know what was out there watching us. Was it the creature people call Bigfoot? Maybe. All I know is that something intelligent was stalking us, something that wanted us to know it was there. And all these years later, I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can smell that distinctive odor in the darkness outside my window. Story 13. It was me, Jake, Marcus, and Chris. We were all in our early 20s then, just a bunch of bored guys looking for something to do on a Saturday. Marcus had heard about this old abandoned barn from his cousin who lived in the area. It was somewhere in the driftless region of Wisconsin. You know, that hilly area that wasn't flattened by glaciers during the Ice Age. Beautiful country, but remote as hell in some parts. Marcus's cousin had said the barn was creepy as shit and that no one had lived on the property for decades. Of course, that was all we needed to hear. We loaded up in Jake's old Jeep Cherokee around 4 in the afternoon, bringing some beers, flashlights, and our phones, which were useless pieces of crap back then compared to what we have now. The drive took about an hour and a half from Madison. I remember we were joking around, talking about girls and college football, just normal stuff. None of us were taking this seriously at all. It was just something to do, you know? We found the turnoff to the property just as the sun was starting to set. It was one of those perfect October days, crisp air, leaves changing colors, that golden hour light filtering through the trees. The dirt road leading to the property hadn't been maintained in forever. Jake's Jeep handled it okay, but we decided to park when the path got too overgrown, maybe a quarter mile from where we could see the barn. The walk through the field felt longer than it probably was. The grass came up to our knees in some spots, and you could tell nobody had been taking care of this place. As we got closer, I remember thinking the barn looked exactly like what you'd expect in a horror movie. It was this massive, weathered structure with faded red paint peeling off in strips. The roof was partially caved in on one side, and thick vines crawled up the walls. A couple of windows were broken, and the main door hung crooked on its hinges. "Dude, this place is perfect," Chris said, and we all agreed. The barn was genuinely creepy, especially as the light was fading. We had maybe an hour of daylight left. We approached cautiously, not because we were scared of anything supernatural, but because the structure looked so unstable. Jake tested the main door, pushing it open with a loud creak that echoed inside. The smell hit us immediately. Musty, damp wood, animal droppings, and that distinct scent of abandonment. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. Dusty floorboards covered with debris, old rusted farm equipment scattered around, and animal pens built along the walls. Light streamed in through holes in the roof and the broken windows, creating beams in the dusty air. A wooden ladder led up to a loft that ran along the back half of the structure. "I'm going up to check out the loft," Tyler announced, already heading for the ladder. The rest of us spread out to explore the ground floor. I found an old workbench with tools still sitting on it, like whoever owned the place. just walked away one day and never came back. Marcus was poking through what looked like an old feed storage area, while Chris was examining some weird markings scratched into one of the support beams. That's when things started to feel off. I can't really explain it better than that. The air seemed to get heavier somehow. The birds that had been chirping outside went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. It was like someone had just muted the world. "You guys feel that?" Marcus asked, his voice noticeably quieter than before. "Feel what?" I replied, but I already knew what he meant. "Like we're being watched or something," he said, glancing toward the open door. We all laughed nervously, but nobody made any jokes. Tyler called down from the loft, "There's nothing much up here except some old hay and a dead raccoon." I was about to suggest we head back to the car. The place was cool, but it was getting dark fast, and none of us had brought proper flashlights, just the ones on our phones, when we heard it. A loud metallic crash from somewhere behind the barn, like something heavy had been knocked over or thrown. We all froze. My heart immediately started racing. "What the fuck was that?" Chris whispered. "Probably just an animal," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. Then came the breathing, deep, heavy breathing, just outside the barn walls. It wasn't like a person who had been running or anything like that. It was bigger somehow, deeper. Each breath was slow and deliberate. "Tyler, get down here," I hissed toward the loft. He was already scrambling down the ladder, his face pale. We all pulled out our phones and turned on the flashlight apps, pointing them toward the back wall of the barn, where the sound seemed to be coming from. The beams of light looked pathetic in the growing darkness. The next sound made my blood run cold. Something big, slammed into the side of the barn with enough force to make the entire structure shake. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. A support beam groaned. "Jesus Christ!" Marcus yelped, stumbling backward. Before any of us could speak again, we heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps circling around the exterior of the barn. Each one made the floorboards beneath our feet vibrate slightly. Whatever was out there was massive. The footsteps moved slowly around the perimeter, heading toward the front of the barn, toward the main entrance where we had come in. We all instinctively backed away from the door, huddling together in the center of the barn. "There's got to be another way out," Jake whispered frantically, his flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls as he searched. The footsteps stopped right at the entrance. For a few seconds there was complete silence. Then a shadow fell across the doorway, blocking what little remaining daylight there was. I'll never forget what I saw when we all pointed our flashlights at the entrance. Standing there, filling the entire doorframe was, I don't even know how to describe it properly. It was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Its body was massive, covered in thick, dark brown hair or fur. The arms hung low, almost to its knees, ending in hands that looked powerful enough to crush a bowling ball. But it was the face that made my legs go weak. Not completely covered in hair like the body. The face had shorter hair around the cheeks and jaw, but the forehead and area around the eyes was bare skin, grayish and tough-looking. Deep-set eyes stared at us from beneath a heavy brow ridge, reflecting our flashlight beams with a dull glow. The nose was wide and flat, the mouth a grim line beneath it. For what felt like eternity, it just stood there, staring at us. I couldn't move. None of us could. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. Then it roared. The sound was unlike anything I've ever heard. Not quite animal, not quite human. It was deafening inside the enclosed space of the barn, a deep, guttural bellow that you could feel in your chest. Chris dropped his phone, the flashlight beam spinning crazily across the floor as he fell backward. The smell hit us next, a powerful, musky odor that made my stomach turn, like wet dog and rotting vegetation and something else I couldn't identify. The creature, I still can't bring myself to call it Bigfoot, even though that's clearly what it was, took a step forward into the barn, ducking its head slightly to clear the doorframe. It made a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the air around us. "There!" Tyler screamed, pointing to our right. There was a smaller side door, partially blocked by fallen boards and old equipment. Without hesitation, we all bolted toward it. I remember kicking pieces of wood out of the way, Jake and Marcus shoving an old barrel aside. The door was stuck, swollen with age and moisture. Chris slammed his shoulder into it once, twice, and on the third try, it burst open. We spilled out into the twilight, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. Behind us, the creature let out another roar that seemed to shake the very ground. I didn't look back. I don't think any of us did. We just ran, stumbling through the high grass toward the direction where we'd left the jeep. My lungs were burning, my legs pumping on pure adrenaline. I could hear my friends breathing hard around me, occasional curses as someone would trip in the uneven terrain. The whole time, I was waiting to feel massive hands grab me from behind, but they never came. We reached the jeep in what must have been record time. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them. Marcus snatched them up and unlocked the doors. We piled in, slamming the doors shut. Jake got the engine started and we peeled out, tires spinning in the dirt before catching traction. As we sped away, I finally looked back through the rear window. In the fading light, I could just make out a massive silhouette at the edge of the field, standing perfectly still, watching us leave. The drive back was almost completely silent. What could we even say? Eventually, Chris spoke up. We all saw the same thing, right? His voice was hoarse. We all nodded. What the fuck was that? Tyler asked, but it wasn't really a question. We all knew what we'd seen. We just couldn't believe it. That night, back at Marcus's apartment, we talked it through, trying to make sense of what had happened. Could it have been a bear? No way. It stood upright the entire time, had a face unlike any bear, and was simply too tall, a person in a suit. The movements were too fluid, the roar too powerful, the presence too real. There was no way someone could fake what we'd experienced. We made a pact that night not to tell anyone what we'd seen. Who would believe us anyway? But I know what I saw, what we all saw. It's been almost 18 years now, and I still have nightmares about those eyes staring at us from the barn doorway. I've never gone back to that area, and as far as I know, neither have the others. We don't really hang out much anymore. It's like that experience created this uncomfortable bond between us that none of us wants to acknowledge. But I needed to share this somewhere with people who might understand. I still don't know what to make of what happened that day. All I know is that something was living near that abandoned barn in Wisconsin, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but absolutely does, and it was angry that we had invaded its territory. Story 14. I've never been one for sharing personal stories online, but after 6 months of questioning my own sanity, I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. This happened during our 4th of July camping trip last summer, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My name's Olivia. I'm a single mum with 2 teenage sons, Jake, 17, and Tyler, 15. We'd planned this trip to Cougar Hot Springs outside Springfield, Oregon for weeks. The boys invited a couple friends, Mason and Dylan, and we packed up our old Subaru Outback with camping gear, snacks, and probably too many electronics for what was supposed to be a back-to-nature experience. We got a late start because Jake's summer job kept him until 3, so it was already evening by the time we reached the Hot Springs area. I'd hoped to get one of the nice established campsites near the springs, but of course they were all taken. The ranger at the entrance booth told us we could find spots further out where people sometimes camp under the stars, so we kept driving until we found a suitable clearing about a mile from the main area. It wasn't ideal, just a small open space surrounded by dense forest with tall pines and firs, creating this cathedral-like ceiling above us. No amenities, no fire pit, nothing. But the boys were excited about the adventure of it, and honestly, after working overtime all week, I was just happy to be away from the city. We set up our 2 tents, one for me and one for the boys, and made sandwiches for dinner since it was too late and too dry to risk a campfire. The kids were all hyper from being cooped up in the car, racing around collecting sticks and exploring the immediate area while I organized our supplies. As darkness fell, we sat on our camping chairs, talking and looking at the stars that were just starting to appear. I remember thinking how unusually quiet it was. Normally in forests you hear all kinds of wildlife, birds, squirrels, the rustle of small animals in underbrush. But there was almost nothing, just the occasional breeze through the treetops. I mentioned it to the boys, but they were too busy planning their hike to the hot springs for the next morning to pay much attention. Around 11, everyone finally crawled into their sleeping bags. The boys were in their tent, giggling and watching videos on their phones. I was in my small one-person tent, reading on my Kindle. The silence of the forest seemed even more pronounced now. No crickets, no owls, nothing. I must have dozed off around midnight with my reading glasses still on and my Kindle on my chest. What woke me, I'm still not sure. It wasn't a loud noise, more like a change in the atmosphere, a subtle rustling that didn't match the wind. When I opened my eyes, I was disoriented for a moment. My tent had a mesh window section that I'd left uncovered since the night was warm, and I could see stars through it. Then I heard it again, a soft, deliberate sound of movement just outside. My first thought was bears, which terrified me, since we'd stashed our food in the car, but hadn't been as careful as we should have been with the wrappers from our sandwiches. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. It was 2:18 in the morning. The boys' tent was quiet now. I held my breath and listened, my heart already pounding. There was definitely something out there, moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to make any sudden movements. I sat up and adjusted my glasses that had gone askew while I slept. Then I turned toward the mesh window of my tent, and what I saw made my blood freeze. Standing in the clearing no more than 15 feet from my tent were two creatures I can only describe as Bigfoot. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I've never been one for cryptids or conspiracy theories. I'm a dental hygienist with a practical mind. But what I saw that night was real, and I'll never forget it. The taller one was enormous, easily 7 to 8 feet tall with a massive, bulky frame. Its body was covered in what looked like thick hair, not fur exactly, but more like very dense hair that hung in places. The color wasn't what I expected. Not the brown you see in documentaries or fake footage. This creature was a dirty white color, almost like it had been gray once, but was now weathered or aged. The smaller one stood slightly behind, maybe 5.5 feet tall, with a lighter beige or tan coloring. It seemed younger somehow, not just in size, but in the way it moved, more fidgety and less self-assured. They were standing in an open area with absolutely nowhere to hide. This wasn't some shadow in the trees or something glimpsed at a distance. They were right there, illuminated by the quarter moon and countless stars overhead. What struck me most were their proportions, not at all like a person in a costume. Their arms hung much lower than a human's would, with massive shoulders that seemed almost humped. The hair on their bodies was patchy in places, and I could see the skin underneath on parts of their chests was a grayish color. Their faces weren't ape-like as I would have expected. They had pronounced brow ridges, yes, but their faces were almost human-adjacent is the only way I can describe it. Their noses were flat and wide, their mouths broader than ours. The smaller one's mouth was slightly open, and I could see teeth that looked surprisingly white. The eyes, though, those are what I remember most vividly. They weren't animal eyes at all. The taller one had golden amber eyes that caught the starlight, while the smaller ones were a greenish hazel. There was intelligence there, unmistakable awareness and curiosity. I sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. My mind kept screaming that this couldn't be happening, but my eyes were telling me otherwise. They didn't smell bad like the legends say, more like fresh dirt after rain, an earthy, natural smell that wasn't unpleasant. The smaller one suddenly shifted its weight and seemed about to move away when the larger one made a sound, a low, rumbling groan that wasn't quite a growl. It raised its left arm in a gesture that was unmistakably communicative, beckoning the smaller one back. The movement was so human it sent shivers down my spine. The smaller one obeyed, stepping back to its original position. All this time, the larger creature never took its eyes off me. Its expression was hard to read, but there seemed to be both wariness and curiosity there. It swayed gently from side to side, a motion that struck me as self-soothing rather than threatening. The palms of their hands and the inner parts of their fingers were hairless, and I could see that their hands were massive, but clearly articulated, not paws, but hands with opposable thumbs. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Them watching me watching them. It could have been minutes or an hour. Time seemed to stretch and warp. I was shivering, partly from fear and partly because the night had grown colder. Eventually, the reality of the situation became too overwhelming. I slowly, very slowly, laid back down in my sleeping bag, not taking my eyes off them until I absolutely had to. When I finally closed my eyes, I whispered every prayer I could remember, begging to see the morning. I didn't sleep. How could I? I lay there listening to my heart pounding, waiting for the sound of my tent being torn open. But nothing happened. Eventually, the sky began to lighten, and birds started their morning calls. When I finally worked up the courage to unzip my tent at first light, the clearing was empty. I rushed over to the boys' tent and woke them, probably scaring them half to death with my frantic checking that they were all okay. "Mom, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Jake said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but I could tell from their faces they didn't believe me. Tyler exchanged that look with his friends, the one teenagers give when they think an adult has lost it. "Maybe it was just a couple of deer," Mason suggested kindly. "Or a really vivid dream," Dylan added. I was about to argue when Jake suddenly went quiet, staring at something behind me. I turned to follow his gaze. He was looking at our car, specifically at the back window. Someone, or something, had wiped a circle in the morning dew and dirt on the glass, as if to peer inside. "That's weird," Jake said, walking over to examine it. "That wasn't there yesterday." Then he turned to me, his expression changed. "Mom, last night I woke up for a second because I needed to pee. I looked out toward the car and thought I saw... I don't know, it sounds stupid." "What?" I pressed. "What did you see?" "I thought I saw a face looking into the car, a hairy face with really big eyes. I figured I was half asleep and seeing things." We searched the area, but found no clear footprints, just disturbed ground and some broken underbrush at the edge of the clearing. The earth was too dry and hard-packed to hold prints well. We packed up quickly and left, cutting our trip short. The boys were spooked, not by what they'd seen, but by how genuinely terrified I was. They'd never seen me like that before. I've spent months trying to rationalize what happened. I've looked up local wildlife, researched known hoaxes, even wondered if someone slipped something into my evening tea. But I know what I saw. A few weeks after it happened, I told an old friend who's part Native American about my experience. She wasn't surprised or skeptical, she just nodded and said, "They rarely let themselves be seen, and almost never two at once. That was a gift. A gift." I'm still not sure how to feel about that. All I know is that the forest isn't the same for me anymore. When I look into those dense trees, I know now that sometimes something might be looking back. Story 15. I can't believe I'm finally writing this down after all these years. I've kept it bottled up for so long, only telling a handful of people who mostly thought I was making it up or exaggerating. But I swear on my life, what happened in Washington County back in '84 was real, and it still haunts me to this day. I was 27 then, living on my family's farm near Deep Creek. It was just me and my dad running the place after Mom passed. We weren't rich by any means, but we got by with our chickens, pigs, and the small flock of sheep we kept. It all started that spring. Around March or April, we began noticing small things going missing. At first, it was just eggs from the hen house, not a big deal. Could have been raccoons or foxes. But then, one morning in early May, I went out to feed the pigs and found one of the young ones gone. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just gone. Dad figured maybe it had squeezed through a gap in the fence, but we searched everywhere and found nothing. The next week, one of our spring lambs disappeared. That's when we knew something wasn't right. Animals don't just vanish without a trace. Dad reinforced all the fences and started keeping the shotgun loaded by the back door. It wasn't just us either. When I went into town for supplies, I overheard the millers talking about missing chickens, and old man Jenkins said something had been raiding his smokehouse. Everyone was on edge, but nobody had any real answers. Then came that night in mid-May. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I was up late fixing a broken tractor part in the barn. Dad had gone to bed hours before, and I was working by the light of a kerosene lamp since the electricity in the barn was spotty at best. It must have been around 11:30 when I heard the chickens start to fuss. Now, chickens don't usually make noise at night unless something's disturbing them. I grabbed the flashlight and the small .22 pistol I kept for snakes and headed out to check. The moon was nearly full that night, casting everything in this eerie bluish light. The chicken coop was about 50 yards from the barn, and as I walked over, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like something was watching me. When I got to the coop, the chickens were all huddled in one corner, clucking frantically. I shined my light around, but didn't see anything out of place. No holes in the wire, no sign of a fox or coyote. I was about to head back when I heard something moving in the tree line beyond our property. It wasn't the wind, it was too deliberate, too heavy, the sound of branches breaking under weight. I swung my flashlight toward the noise, and that's when I saw it. At first, all I caught was movement, something big slipping between the trees. Then it stopped and turned toward me, and I swear my heart nearly gave out. There were 2 points of light reflecting my flashlight beam, like eyes, but they were too high off the ground to be any normal animal. They had to be 7 feet up at least. I called out, thinking maybe it was someone trespassing. "Hey, this is private property." My voice sounded thin and scared even to my own ears. Whatever it was didn't respond, but it didn't run either. It just watched me. Then I noticed something even more terrifying. There was another light below the eyes, like its mouth was glowing from the inside, a pale yellowish light, like the glow of rotting wood. I raised my pistol, hands shaking so bad I could barely aim. "I'm armed! Get off my land!" That's when it moved. Not away from me, but toward me. It came out of the tree line, and in the moonlight, I could finally see what it was. Or rather, what it wasn't. Because this thing wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. It stood upright like a man, but much taller, 6.5 feet at least. Its body was covered in this long, coarse hair that hung down from its head and face. The hair wasn't like fur, it was more like horsehair, straight and coarse. The strangest part was that it had some kind of covering on its lower half, like a crude piece of sheepskin wrapped around its waist. But its face, God, its face. The eyes were set deep, reflecting my flashlight with an unnatural glow, and its mouth. I can still see that horrible yellow-green light spilling out from between what looked like human teeth, but longer, sharper. It was walking toward me with this awkward gait, not quite human, but not like an animal either. Its hands, if you could call them that, ended in these claw-like fingers, more like a cat's paws than human hands. I fired a shot into the air, hoping to scare it off. The sound echoed across the fields, and the thing stopped for a moment, cocking its head like it was curious. Then it made this sound, not a growl or a roar, but a kind of high-pitched whine that turned into something like laughter. I can't describe how wrong it sounded. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I turned and ran faster than I've ever run in my life, back toward the house, screaming for my dad. I heard it following me, this heavy thudding on the ground. It was fast, much faster than something that size should be. I made it to the porch just as Dad threw open the door, shotgun in hand. He saw my face and knew something was seriously wrong. "What is it, John? What's happening?" I couldn't even speak, just pointed toward the yard. The thing had stopped at the edge of the light, spilling from the doorway. Dad raised his shotgun and fired a warning shot. The thing flinched but didn't run. Instead, it made that awful laughing sound again and retreated slowly back toward the trees, never taking its glowing eyes off us. Dad pulled me inside and locked the door. I was shaking so bad I could barely stand. When I finally managed to tell him what I'd seen, he didn't laugh or tell me I was crazy. He just got real quiet and poured us both a strong drink. "I've been hearing stories," he said finally, "from the Boston place down the road. Fred said he saw something in his fields last week, thought he was losing his mind." We didn't sleep that night, sat up with the guns loaded, taking turns watching out the windows. Nothing else happened, but the next morning we found 3 of our chickens missing and strange footprints in the mud by the coop. They were almost human-like, but too big, and with these odd indentations at the front, like claws. Word spread fast in a small community like ours. By noon, 6 neighbors had come by to look at the prints. Old man Jenkins said his grandfather used to tell stories about wild men in these hills, but nobody had taken them seriously. Fred Boston and his boys stopped by later that afternoon. Fred was white as a sheet when he saw the footprints. "That's the same thing that's been around my place," he said. "Saw it heading for my barn just yesterday evening. Must be 7 feet tall. Tom here took a shot at it when it ran off with our chickens." Tom, Fred's oldest, nodded grimly. "I swear I hit it too, but it didn't even slow down. Ran straight for that old cave system up in the North Ridge." That got everyone's attention. Those caves had been there since before anyone could remember, stretching deep into the hillside. Kids used to dare each other to go in, but there were stories about people getting lost in there, never coming out. Someone suggested we form a search party, go up to the caves and see if we could find anything. Looking back, it was a stupid idea, but we were all scared and angry. Whatever this thing was, it was threatening our livelihoods, our families. 7 of us went up there the next day, all armed. Me, Dad, the Boston boys, Jenkins, and a couple others. The cave entrance was bigger than I remembered, a dark gash in the hillside, partially hidden by brush. Right away, we found signs that something had been using it. Disturbed earth around the entrance, broken branches, and worse, bones and feathers scattered around, like whatever lived there had been bringing its kills back to eat. The smell coming from inside was awful, a mix of rot and something musky, animal-like but wrong somehow. Jenkins wanted to turn back right then, but Fred insisted we at least look inside. Tom and I had the most powerful flashlights, so we led the way. Just inside the entrance, the cave opened up into a larger chamber. The floor was littered with more bones, not just chickens and small animals, but what looked disturbingly like sheep and pig remains too, our missing livestock. But what really chilled my blood was the far wall of the chamber. Someone had drawn on it, crude, childlike drawings in what looked like charcoal and something red I didn't want to think about. They showed stick figures of animals and taller figures that I guess were supposed to be people, and among them, a much larger figure with long, hanging hair. "This thing can draw?" Tom whispered, his voice echoing slightly off the walls. That's when we heard it. From deeper in the cave, a low rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite human. Fred raised his rifle, pointing it toward the dark tunnel leading further in. "Hello," he called out, his voice shaking. "We know you're in there." The response came immediately. a scream so loud and unnatural it felt like it was tearing through my skull. It wasn't animal, it wasn't human, it was something in between, filled with rage and hunger and something else I couldn't name. The sound echoed and multiplied in the cave until it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. We didn't even think, just turned and ran. I don't think I've ever moved so fast in my life. We burst out of the cave into the daylight, not stopping until we were a good 100 yards away. We went back the next day with more men, torches, even dogs. The plan was to smoke whatever it was out of the cave, but the dogs wouldn't go near the entrance. They just whined and pulled at their leashes, and when we tried to go in ourselves, that same unholy scream echoed out, louder than before, making the bravest men among us hesitate. Someone suggested using dynamite to seal the cave, but there was worry about damaging the water table. In the end, the sheriff set up a watch, men taking turns with rifles, waiting for the thing to emerge. They kept it up for 3 days, but nothing came out. The strange thing is, after that, the disappearances stopped. No more missing livestock, no more sightings. It was like whatever had been there had either left or gone deeper into the cave system. Weeks passed, then months. People started to relax, to convince themselves it had just been a bear or some other explainable animal. But I knew what I'd seen. Those glowing eyes, that light coming from its mouth, the way it moved, that was no animal I knew of. To this day, I don't go near that part of the property after dark. I've told myself all the rational explanations, that it was a hobo with a flashlight, that the stress and poor lighting made me see things that weren't there. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is right, I swear I can still hear that high, unnatural laughter drifting from the direction of the caves, and every time it makes my blood run cold, because I know that whatever that thing was, it's probably still out there, watching and waiting in the darkness. Story 16. I still think about that day all the time. 23 years later, and I can't shake it. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just another hunting trip with the boys up at Great Central Lake. But what we saw there, hell, I've never told anyone outside our hunting party and the local sheriff. People would think I'm crazy. It was late October in 1904, and I had organized a week-long hunting trip with my 3 closest friends, Thomas Hutchins, Albert Crump, and William Buss. We'd been planning it for months. The 4 of us had been hunting together since we were teenagers, and this was our annual tradition. We were all in our 30s by then, with families and responsibilities, so these trips were precious escapes. Vancouver Island was beautiful that time of year. The autumn colors were at their peak, vibrant reds and golds against the deep green of the pines. We'd set up our camp near Horn Lake, just off Great Central Lake, remote enough that we wouldn't run into other hunters, but still accessible by the rough trails that existed back then. The morning it happened started like any other. We woke before dawn, had a quick breakfast of coffee and leftover venison from the previous day's hunt. I remember Thomas complaining about the cold. He always did, even though he'd been born and raised in British Columbia just like the rest of us. William was cleaning his rifle while Albert sketched out our route for the day on a crude map he'd drawn. "We should head northwest today," Albert suggested. "There's good tracking ground in that valley, and we haven't hunted it yet this trip." We all agreed and set out just as the first light was breaking through the trees. The forest was misty that morning, with low clouds hanging between the tall pines. Our breath came out in white puffs, and the ground was damp with morning dew. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. Just the sound of our boots on the pine needles and the occasional call of a bird. We'd been walking for maybe 2 hours, moving slowly and quietly as hunters do. We'd split into pairs, but stayed within shouting distance. Thomas with me, William with Albert. The forest was getting denser as we moved further from camp, the undergrowth thicker and more tangled. I remember having to use my knife to cut through some of the brambles. It was around mid-morning when it happened. Thomas and I had paused near a small clearing to check for tracks when we heard William's low whistle, our signal that he'd spotted something. We carefully made our way toward them, keeping quiet and staying low. When we reached them, William pointed silently toward a small stream about 30 yards ahead. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the running water, some rocks, and the thick undergrowth on the other side. Then something moved, and I felt every hair on my body stand up. There, kneeling by the stream, was something. Someone. I still struggle to describe it accurately. It looked like a child from a distance, small in stature, maybe 4 feet tall at most. But as I raised my binoculars for a better look, I realized it wasn't a child at all. The figure was completely covered in thick, matted brown hair. Not clothing, actual hair growing from its body. It had its back to us, hunched over the stream, apparently drinking or maybe catching something in the water. Its movements were quick and precise, almost animal-like, but with a disturbing human quality to them. "What the hell is that?" Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. None of us answered. We were frozen, rifles half raised, unable to process what we were seeing. Then Albert shifted his weight, and a twig snapped under his boot. The sound wasn't loud, but in the quiet forest it might as well have been a gunshot. The creature's head snapped up with such speed it was almost a blur, and that's when I saw its face, or what I could see of it beneath the matted hair. It had a strangely elongated head, covered with the same brown hair as its body. A beard grew from its chin, not the scraggly beginnings of adolescent facial hair, but a proper beard, though matted and dirty. But its eyes, God, its eyes, they were unmistakably human, intelligent, aware. They locked onto us immediately, widening with what I can only describe as fear or recognition. For maybe 2 seconds, we stared at each other across that stream. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should say something to it. Then everything happened at once. The creature, this wild boy, as we later called it, made a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a scream, not quite a growl, but something in between. Then it moved. I've been a hunter all my life. I've seen deer bolt, bears charge, and wolves run. Nothing, absolutely nothing, moved like this thing did. It was up and away in a heartbeat, darting into the underbrush on the far side of the stream with impossible speed. "Jesus Christ!" William shouted, finally breaking our collective trance. What was that? "After it!" I found myself yelling, already splashing through the shallow stream. I don't know why I wanted to follow it. Curiosity, the hunter's instinct, or simple disbelief. We all gave chase, stumbling through the dense undergrowth where the creature had disappeared. The vegetation was so thick it seemed impassable. Thickets of thorny bushes, fallen trees, and tangled vines. Yet somehow that thing had moved through it as easily as running across an open field. I was in the lead, pushing branches aside and trying to catch a glimpse of brown hair among the green and brown of the forest. Thomas was right behind me, with Albert and William bringing up the rear. We ran for maybe 5 minutes, following broken twigs and disturbed vegetation. Then I broke through into another small clearing and had to stop abruptly to avoid running straight into a massive fallen cedar. Thomas crashed into me from behind, nearly sending us both to the ground. "Do you see it?" he gasped, out of breath. I scanned the area, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound except for our own heavy breathing and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I lost it, I admitted, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Albert and William caught up, both red-faced and panting. "What the hell was that thing?" Albert asked, voicing what we were all thinking. "A bear cub," William suggested, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe it himself. "Did you see its face?" Thomas said quietly. "That wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I've ever seen before." We stood there in that clearing for a long time, catching our breath and trying to make sense of what we'd witnessed. Eventually we decided to continue tracking it, but it was futile. The creature had vanished completely, leaving no trail that we could follow. It was as if it knew these woods far better than we did, which I suppose it probably did. We spent the rest of the day searching the area, moving in widening circles from where we'd lost the trail. We found nothing. No footprints clear enough to identify, no hair caught on branches that couldn't have come from a known animal, no den or shelter. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, a nervous tension settled over our group. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were all spooked. The forest that had seemed so familiar that morning now felt alien and watchful. "We should head back to camp," William finally said as the shadows lengthened, "before it gets dark." No one argued. We made our way back in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. A child with a disorder that caused excessive hair growth, some unknown species of primate, a human who had somehow gone feral. None of the explanations felt right. That night around the campfire, we finally talked about it openly. We described what we'd each seen, comparing details, trying to construct a coherent picture of the creature. "It moved like nothing I've ever seen," Albert said, staring into the flames. "Like it knew exactly where to place each foot, even at that speed, through undergrowth that would have stopped any of us cold." "The hair was all over," William added. "Not like clothing, growing from the skin like an animal, but the face." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It wasn't afraid of us," I realized aloud. Not at first. It was surprised, maybe, but not afraid until Albert made that noise. Thomas had been quiet for most of the conversation, but now he spoke up. "Did any of you notice its hands?" he asked. "When it was at the stream, we all turned to look at him. They were using the water, not just drinking like an animal. They looked like hands, human hands." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October night. We barely slept that night. Every sound from the forest seemed amplified. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves. I kept imagining those intelligent eyes watching us from the darkness beyond our firelight. The next morning we made the unanimous decision to cut our trip short. None of us said it outright, but we were all too unsettled to continue hunting. We packed up camp and began the long journey back to civilization. When we reached Port Alberni 2 days later, we went straight to the local sheriff's office. I don't know what we expected, a search party perhaps, or information about a missing child, but the sheriff, a weathered man named Davis who'd held the position for decades, just listened to our story with an unreadable expression. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "You boys aren't the first to see something strange in those woods," he finally said. "There have been stories for years. The natives have their own names for them." "Them?" William asked sharply. "There are more?" Sheriff Davis shrugged. "So they say. Strange creatures that are neither man nor beast. Most folks write it off as superstition or mistaken identity." "This wasn't mistaken identity," Albert insisted. "We all saw it clearly." "I believe you saw something," the sheriff replied carefully. What exactly, I couldn't say. He took our statement anyway, wrote down all the details while we were still fresh in our minds. Promised he'd look into it, though I could tell he had no intention of organizing a search party for what he probably thought was a bear cub, or our imaginations running wild. That was 23 years ago now. As far as I know, there was never any official follow-up to our report. We never went back to Horn Lake, never hunted in that part of Vancouver Island again. The four of us still get together occasionally, though less often as the years have passed. We don't always talk about what we saw that day, but it's always there between us, a shared secret, a mystery we never solved. Sometimes I wonder about that wild boy. Is it still out there in those remote forests? Was it alone, or are there others like it? Was it some kind of missing link, a creature caught between humanity and something else? I don't know. I'll probably never know. But on cold autumn nights when the wind moves through the trees outside my window, I remember those intelligent eyes staring into mine across that stream, and I wonder if it remembers me too. Story 17. I still can't sleep right. It's been 3 weeks since that night, and I keep replaying it in my mind. I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. And I sure as hell wasn't on anything. I know what I saw. It was a Tuesday night, and I was driving back home from visiting my buddy in Crescent City. I left his place around 10:30 at night, which put me on Highway 101 between Orick and Klamath at about 11:15. If you're not familiar with that stretch of road, it winds through some of the most remote redwood forest in Northern California. Beautiful during the day, but at night, it's pitch black except for your headlights, and the trees create these walls on either side that make you feel tiny. I was in my Jeep Wrangler. Nothing fancy, just a 2012 model with a 3-inch lift. I installed myself last summer. I've got 4 rigid off-road lights mounted across the top bar that light up the road like daylight for a good 100 yards ahead. Those lights have saved my ass from hitting deer more times than I can count, which is why I installed them in the first place. The radio was playing some classic rock station that kept cutting in and out with static, typical for that area. I remember I had the heat on because it was chilly, maybe in the low 40s. I wasn't really thinking about anything specific, just driving and looking forward to getting home, maybe grabbing a beer before bed. The traffic was non-existent. I hadn't seen another car for at least 20 minutes. That's normal for that road at that time of night. You can go miles without seeing another human being. I was doing about 55, not rushing but not crawling either. I was rounding this gentle curve, and that's when I first saw it. There was something on the right shoulder about 100 yards ahead. My first thought was bear. We get a lot of them around here, and they often rummage around roadkill at night. It looked like it was crouched low to the ground, hunched over something. I didn't slow down at first. Like I said, bears are common, and they usually scatter when they see headlights. But as I got closer, maybe 50 yards away, the thing stood up, and it stood up smoothly and quickly, like it was unfolding itself. That's when I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. The silhouette was all wrong. It was huge, yes, but the proportions were human-like, but not human. Definitely not human. It was massive, much bulkier than any person I've ever seen, and tall, really tall. I instinctively took my foot off the gas. My heart started pounding, and I felt this cold sweat break out across my back. I've been hunting my whole life. I know every animal in these woods, and this wasn't anything I recognized. At about 30 yards, I could see more details. It had these long arms that hung down past its knees. Its torso was thick like a barrel, with virtually no neck. The head just sat low between its shoulders and seemed to slope forward. The whole body was covered in this dark, shaggy fur that hung unevenly from its limbs and back. It wasn't the sleek fur of a bear. It was matted and rough-looking. I was actively slowing down now, partly out of caution and partly because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what was standing there on the side of the highway. A person in a costume, at 11 at night in the middle of nowhere, a weird bear standing awkwardly. No way. When I got to about 15 or 20 yards away, it happened. The thing suddenly turned toward the forest and just leaped. I don't mean it ran or lumbered like a bear would. This thing launched itself from a standing position on the shoulder straight into the dense forest in one powerful motion. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. No crashing sounds, no breaking branches. It disappeared into those trees like it was smoke. I hit the brakes and came to a complete stop where it had been standing. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, my high beams pointing at the spot where it vanished, the engine idling. Part of me wanted to get out and look, but a much smarter part kept my ass firmly in the driver's seat. What really struck me was how tall it was. My Jeep with the lift and lights stands about 6.5 feet high. This thing was noticeably taller than that. I'd guess 7, maybe even 8 feet. And the mass of it wasn't just tall, it was built like a linebacker on steroids. I never saw its face clearly. It never fully turned toward me, but I saw enough. The size, the way it moved, how quickly it disappeared into forest that would stop a human being in their tracks. After sitting there frozen for what felt like forever, I finally put my foot back on the gas and drove away. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see it running alongside the road or something, but there was nothing. I called my girlfriend when I got home, even though it was after midnight. I needed to tell someone. She thought I was messing with her at first. Then she got worried I was hallucinating from exhaustion. I don't blame her. I'd probably react the same way. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it was just a bear, and my tired mind had played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. This wasn't that. I went back the next day in daylight. I don't know what I expected to find. Footprints, maybe. The shoulder was mostly gravel and hard-packed dirt, not the kind of surface that holds tracks well. I looked at the spot where it disappeared into the woods. The underbrush was thick, all salal bushes and ferns, the kind of stuff that would tear you up if you tried to run through it. Yet whatever I saw had moved through it without making a sound. I've been thinking about this constantly for the past 3 weeks. I've never believed in Bigfoot before. I always thought those stories were just misidentified bears or people letting their imagination run wild. But now, I don't know what to think. I'm not saying it was definitely Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it, but it wasn't anything I can explain. The way it moved is what gets me. No human moves like that. No bear either. It was fluid and powerful, like an athlete, but on a whole different scale. And the jump. Jesus, that jump. From standing still to gone in a split second. That's not normal. I haven't told many people about this. My girlfriend, my buddy from Crescent City, and now you guys. I'm not looking for attention or trying to start some Bigfoot hunting expedition. I just need to tell someone who might actually believe me. I drive that stretch of road at least once a week for work. Every time I slow down at that curve, every time I scan the trees looking for something moving in the shadows, and every time my hands get sweaty on the steering wheel. I've been reading up on Bigfoot sightings in Northern California. Turns out there have been dozens reported in that exact area over the years. People describe the same thing. Tall, muscular, covered in dark fur, moves incredibly fast. I never paid attention to those stories before. Now I can't stop reading them. One thing I've noticed is that I feel weirdly marked somehow. Like once you see something like this, you become aware of a world that exists alongside ours that most people never notice. I find myself looking into the trees more when I'm outdoors. Listening harder to sounds in the forest, wondering what else might be out there that we don't understand. I've thought about setting up trail cameras in that area, but something holds me back. Part of me doesn't want confirmation. What if I actually caught something on camera? What then? Would anyone even believe me, or would they just say it was faked? The other night I was sitting on my back porch having a beer and looking at the tree line behind my property. It was almost dark, and for a split second I thought I saw something moving between the trees. My whole body went cold. It was probably just a deer or my eyes playing tricks, but I went inside and locked the door anyway. That's what this experience has done to me. It's made me question things I used to take for granted. It's made me wonder what else might be real that we dismiss as stories or legends. I'm not asking you to believe me. I know how it sounds. If someone told me this story 3 weeks ago, I'd think they were full of shit or saw a bear in bad lighting. But I know what I saw wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything that's supposed to exist. Whatever it was aware of me. It knew my headlights were approaching. It chose that moment to stand up, as if to let me see it, and then it chose to disappear. I can't shake the feeling that the whole encounter was deliberate, that it wanted to be seen just for a moment before vanishing back into its world. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. Part of me hopes I don't, but another part can't stop looking. Story 18. I've been carrying this story for over 50 years now, and it still leaves me shaken when I recall what happened. I'm not the type to believe in monsters or anything supernatural, but what I witnessed that autumn in '70 changed me forever. I was 26 years old, hunting in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California. October had just begun, and I'd set up a good camp near a creek about 40 miles from the nearest settlement. I'd been living off the land for years by then, trapping, hunting, selling pelts, and I knew what I was doing. I'd chosen that spot carefully. Good water source, sheltered from wind, decent visibility of the surrounding area, and plenty of game trails nearby. The first few days went as expected. I'd set my traps at dawn, spend the day hunting, then return to camp by late afternoon to prepare whatever I'd caught and tend to my fire. That fire was crucial for cooking, warmth at night, and keeping predators away. I always built it properly, with a stone ring and plenty of cleared space around it. On the fourth day, I returned to camp and immediately sensed something was wrong. My fire was out, completely cold. I figured maybe a strong wind had kicked up, but the ashes were scattered oddly, as if someone had deliberately spread them around. My cooking pot was tipped over, and my pack had been moved from where I'd left it. Nothing was missing. That's what was strangest. Not even the jerky I'd left drying on a rack. I rebuilt the fire, checked my perimeter, and tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear, curious about my supplies. But no bear I'd ever encountered would put out a fire without leaving massive claw marks or destroying my camp looking for food. The next morning, I headed out again, but felt uneasy leaving camp. When I returned that afternoon, same thing, fire out, camp disturbed, but nothing taken. This time, I found tracks in the wet sand near the creek, about 300 yards from my site. They weren't animal tracks. They looked human, but enormous, easily twice the size of my own foot. The stride length between them was incredible, suggesting whatever made them stood much taller than any man I'd ever seen. By the 6th day, I was determined to catch whatever was visiting my camp. Instead of checking my traps, I packed some food, took my rifle, and found a good hiding spot about 60 yards from camp with clear sight lines. I settled in behind some rocks and brush and waited. Hours passed. The morning chill gave way to midday warmth. I stayed perfectly still, watching, waiting. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard it, a high-pitched whistling sound coming from the direction of the creek. It wasn't a bird call or any animal sound I recognized. It was almost deliberate. Then I saw it emerge from the tree line. My blood went cold. The thing walked upright like a man, but was unlike any human I'd ever seen. It stood at least 7 feet tall, with broad, square shoulders and arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its body was long and powerful, but its legs seemed disproportionately short. The creature moved with an odd gait, not clumsy, but different from a human walk. Most disturbing was its head, small for its frame, and seemingly attached directly to its shoulders with no visible neck. Every inch of it was covered in thick, cinnamon-colored hair. Not fur exactly, but hair, growing close to its eyes, which I couldn't clearly see from my position. I gripped my rifle tighter, but didn't dare move. The creature approached my camp cautiously, looking around as if making sure the area was clear. Then it walked directly to my campfire, which was still burning low from when I'd left it that morning. What happened next was bizarre. The creature squatted down and began methodically pulling sticks from the fire. It would grab a burning stick, stand up, and wave it around in the air until the flame went out. Then it would drop the stick and grab another. It continued this process, seeming almost fascinated by the fire dying on each piece of wood. Eventually, it had extinguished the entire fire, spreading the ashes around with its foot. I remained frozen, afraid to breathe. The creature seemed satisfied with its work and turned to leave, but then paused and lifted its head, as if listening. That whistling sound came again, but from further away this time. The creature responded with its own whistle, higher pitched than the first. Within minutes, a second creature appeared, similar to the first, but slightly smaller. They communicated with those whistles, and then both began examining my camp, touching my supplies, opening my pack, but still taking nothing. They spent perhaps 15 minutes exploring before heading back toward the creek. I stayed hidden, too terrified to move. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Were they some kind of undiscovered Indians? No, they were too different, too inhuman. Bears walking upright? Impossible. Their proportions and movements were nothing like bears. Just when I thought it was safe to move, I heard more whistling. To my horror, the two creatures returned, but this time with two more of their kind. 4 of them now, all with the same bizarre appearance. Tall, hairy, with those unnaturally long arms and small heads. They gathered around my extinguished fire pit and repeated the same behavior, picking up partially burned sticks and examining them, even though there were no flames left. One of them found my water skin and sniffed it before taking a drink. Another picked up my hunting knife, turning it over in its hands before setting it down again. They seemed curious rather than destructive, but that didn't make the situation any less terrifying. The largest one, the first I'd seen, suddenly turned and looked directly toward my hiding place. I ducked lower, certain I hadn't made a sound, but something had caught its attention. It stared in my direction for what felt like an eternity. I could feel my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Finally, it turned away, made a low grunting sound to the others, and they all left, heading back toward the creek. I stayed hidden until sunset, afraid they might return. When darkness began to fall, I crept back to camp, grabbed only what I absolutely needed, and moved about a mile away to make a cold camp for the night. I didn't sleep at all, sitting with my back against a tree, rifle across my lap, jumping at every sound. The next morning, I returned cautiously to my original camp. Everything was as they'd left it, but I found more of those massive footprints all around the area. I rebuilt my fire and tried to continue my hunting routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For the next 3 weeks, the same pattern continued. I'd leave camp, return to find it disturbed, and occasionally catch glimpses of the creatures from a distance. Sometimes just one would appear, sometimes all 4. Always they extinguished my fire in that same bizarre ritual. I began leaving small offerings, berries, a piece of jerky, thinking maybe they'd take what they wanted and leave the rest of my camp alone. The offerings would disappear, but they still put out my fire every day. By early November, I couldn't take it anymore. The constant stress, the lack of sleep, the feeling of eyes always watching, it was too much. I packed my things and abandoned the area, moving nearly 30 miles before setting up a new camp. Even then, for weeks afterward, I'd wake up in the night, convinced I heard that distinctive whistling. I never told anyone the full story until now. Who would believe me? Even experienced hunters and trappers would think I'd gone mad from isolation. I've spent decades wondering what those creatures were. They weren't aggressive. They could have easily harmed me if they wanted to. But their intelligence, their curiosity about fire, their method of communication, it all suggests something far beyond any animal I've encountered. I've never returned to that area, and I never will. Whatever those creatures were, they've claimed that territory as their own. Sometimes I still dream about them. Those broad shoulders, those long arms, those expressionless faces covered in cinnamon hair. And in my dreams, they're always putting out fires, one stick at a time, whistling to each other in the fading light. To this day, I keep a fire burning all night when I camp, and I never stay in one place too long. Some things you encounter in the wilderness defy explanation, and some territories aren't meant for humans to claim. Those creatures in the Sierra Nevadas taught me that lesson 50 years ago, and I've never forgotten it.